Chapter 9:17. In order to ensure a good audiovisual effect, the military classroom was very dark, and the interior was not big, at most able to accommodate about 10 people. Now it was empty. There wasn't even a seat. Luonan only saw one person when he entered. The person was sitting cross-legged on the ground in a very casual manner. There was even a medical robot beside him, buzzing around him. There was the smell of blood in the room. It was obvious that this person was injured, and the medical robot was treating his wounds. Luonan pondered. This person was probably a veteran maintenance soldier who had returned from the front lines. He had finished his mission and returned to recover from his injuries. But he still came to participate in the training. It could be said that he was extremely hardworking. Since the class had already begun, Luonan found it inappropriate to greet the wounded soldier. He walked softly and quietly to the position behind the wounded soldier and copied the wounded soldier. He sat on the ground and raised his head to watch the video. The scene at the beginning was very similar to the day when Colonel Jean had lined up a row of learning boards. They were all arranged with a lot of formulas and diagrams, the kind that could make a non-professional's head explode. Moreover, the video had been processed by technology, and it was very immersive. It made people feel as if they were at the scene, and the grumpy Lieutenant Colonel Sheng Zhan could point at their noses and ask questions at any time. Lieutenant Colonel Sheng Zhan raised his voice and said, "It's meaningless to evaluate the remote designer's plan. We just need to understand what kind of environment this professional has built and how to adapt to it as soon as possible." First, the playback of the video suddenly paused. Luonan was in the middle of retrieving the class notes that Liang Lu had sent him. He was a bit stupefied when he saw the situation. He subconsciously believed that the video had malfunctioned. Right when he was about to get up and take a look at the situation, the wounded soldier in front of him turned around. "Hey, kid, basic version or interactive version?" The man's back was facing the light from a video. The shadow on his face and the reflection of the metal structure intertwined, making him look quite ferocious. Such an image was a little similar to Sir Shi Yuan, whom he had met once before. However, he was relatively short and thin, and his domineering aura was far inferior. He looked more like a ruffian soldier. Purely from his senses, this person's appearance and tone did not seem to be a good person. But since the other party took the initiative to communicate, Luonan responded honestly, "Sir, I didn't know there were different versions. This is my first time." "Yes, sir." Luonan had already seen the insignia of this person's position. It was a non-commissioned officer rank. This person would certainly be able to control Luonan. This was the duty of a private soldier. The sergeant continued, "Logically speaking, you should read the basic version. It's fine as long as you know the general meaning. But I really don't want to waste my time with you. By the way, how long is your training schedule?" Luonan confirmed the current time. "I'll be at work at 9 o'clock. There's nearly an hour left." Of course, he was referring to the Heavenly Abyss unit, which was equivalent to about 80 minutes of Earth time. The sergeant was a little taken aback. "That's very lenient. Has old Go become kind? Let's watch the interactive version together. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask. Think carefully before you ask. Don't talk nonsense. Don't be long-winded. Otherwise, don't blame me for kicking you out." Okay. Luonan felt that although this person had a bad mouth, he was actually quite easy to deal with. At the very least, he could take care of other people's actual circumstances. As for what the interactive version was, Luonan sought assistance from the AI and soon found out the answer. So it turned out that this training course was interactive. Its basic content was recorded for the first time when he was promoted to a field officer. It was only half an hour in length. The content of this half an hour was actually edited from Sheng Zhan's training course for middle and high-ranking technical officers. It was a bit too profound. Most of the non-professionals were just there to watch the show and understand the basic situation and things to take note of. But for the basic technical officers, they had to delve into it more or less. Watching it once was definitely not enough, and there was no need to repeatedly slice it frame by frame. Therefore, it was designed in an interactive format. The trainee could ask questions in the form of a message, asking specific questions in actual operations. The AI would sort it out and hand it over to Sheng Zhan or other technical experts for an answer. Then it would be edited and processed again, realizing a second refinement and expansion of the key and difficult content, endlessly supplementing the training content. Therefore, theoretically speaking, the interactive version that the trainee watched would be different every time. And the more time passed, the richer the content would be, the more popular it would be, and the more practical it would be. As time allowed, Luo Nan obviously wanted to watch the most valuable version. The training video continued to play. Sheng Zhan didn't waste words and went straight to the point. First of all, the most direct effect of this structural design is to interfere with the magneto-optical mica jellyfish. It destroys the space-time environment that is highly advantageous to the opponent, rendering the energy-stealing tentacle ineffective. It protects the plane of the base's jade crystal array. Clearly, the original situation was destroyed and the space-time fortress was reconstructed. This was the main goal of the designer. The base really needed this at the time, and he succeeded. However, that person's design philosophy completely disregarded safety regulations. Moreover, it had a high degree of classical inclination. It fully utilized an interactive interference structure to pursue the dynamic equilibrium of different rules and environments. It didn't have any misgivings about the evil and poisonous environment. It boldly utilized it. I lack in-depth research into space-time configurations. I don't know if this was the only path to take at the time. However, that person did subvert the principle of opposing the jade crystal array and the evil and poisonous environment. The two were sufficiently stirred in the environmental rules, influencing and permeating each other. The result was that the evil and poisonous environment seeped into the base, forming pollution. It brought about a large negative interference. Due to the requirements of his post, Officer Xiao continuously observed the changes in the space-time environment. Therefore, he was directly affected. And outside of the base, the enemy's attacks were relatively weak. There is sufficient evidence to prove that they suffered from the reverse infiltration of the jade crystal array's rules. They are also adapting and adjusting. The environment that influences and permeates each other cannot be reversed in a short period of time. Whoever adapts faster will have the advantage. In this regard, compared to the magnet photon mica jellyfish of the Grand Monarch rank, our net-type jade crystal array has a very weak self-cleaning ability before it is ignited and connected to the internet. We can basically confirm that it will be scrapped in 4 weeks, and its full power won't last more than 3 weeks at most. Within 3 weeks, there are 2 opportunities to reverse the situation. The first is that the forward operating base is completed and can be ignited and connected to the network. The second is that reinforcements arrive in time. If they don't arrive in time, then we will have to make preparations to break out. But no matter what, we must ensure that the jade crystal array of the relay station operates stably even though it is sick. We must upgrade and transform all sorts of equipment, especially the dynamo core. We must install filtering and suppression functions to reduce the negative interference of the evil and poisonous pollution as much as possible. This was the basic point of view of Officer Xiao Luo. He didn't make dry statements. Instead, he used a complete set of models and logic to illustrate the problem through a large number of structural diagrams. Luo Nan's eyes were a feast for the eyes. Actually, there were quite a few mathematical models that he didn't understand. But he was the main culprit. He was the one who caused the disaster. Even if his thoughts and designs back then had become fuzzy under the stress of the exam, these impressions were quickly being refreshed as the repeated stimulation of the course. Chapter 9:18. In the end, the training course wasn't an academic class. Through rigorous theory and data logic, Lieutenant Commander Sheng Zhan explained the current difficulties faced by the relay station and their root causes. Then he began to arrange specific work. In fact, the current logistics department had already begun to shift its focus. The core of this shift was the various equipment represented by the dynamo core. They had already begun to undergo wartime modifications, production, replacement, and the corresponding design changes. According to Lieutenant Commander Sheng Zhan, the various internal and external dynamo cores had reached 99. 8% of the 11,000 soldiers in the relay station. It was more or less covered. This was also the usual atmosphere of the heavenly Yuan Empire. The dynamo core was the mainstream technology that permeated every level of society. The installation and usage of various dynamo cores had always been high. Basically, entering society was the beginning of a series of changes in the dynamo core version, not to mention in the military, where individuals didn't need to bear the cost. Young people who still had a vision for the future needed external dynamo cores to guarantee their combat strength under the test of blood and fire. Those who had no more potential in their personal cultivation needed internal dynamo cores to increase their ability level. Under these circumstances, changing the design of the dynamo core in order to increase the adaptability of the sinister environment was a huge project. The complex arrangements of defense lines, departments, and personnel simply made people go crazy. Everyone would be affected. Why did the two rookie recruits, Liang Lu and Luo Nan, have their posts pushed further and further away? It was precisely because the replacement work of the dynamo core and other equipment was initiated that the base adopted the strategy of trading materials for time. In any case, they didn't need to worry about the defense mission in 3 or 4 weeks. The large amount of equipment and consumables stored in the relay station were all piled up on the production line. In a short period of time, a large amount of anti-pollution, self-propelled mechanical equipment was produced. The parameters of the artificial intelligence were adjusted, and a limited personnel responsible for the modification of the dynamo core design was given. This caused the maintenance work of an important area like the 2 hive to return to the state where the majority of the maintenance work was done by the AI system and machinery. In the current environment, the rate of equipment damage was bound to be high due to the explosive flow of mechanical soldiers. The maintenance personnel and equipment couldn't keep up, so it was simply better to build than to repair. Large amounts of personnel were stuffed into production posts. The assembly line operation formed a closed loop of production, failure, scrapping, recycling, and production. The core region of the 2 honeycombs central pipeline achieved automatic maintenance. People like Liang Lu and Luo Nan, who had lost their posts, would be chased out before they could even get on the assembly line. At present, the limited maintenance personnel had been pushed to the front line or the areas close to the front line, in order to provide more efficient logistical support for the frontline troops and the areas that had not implemented artificial intelligence maintenance before the overall equipment change was completed so that they could be a buffer. Compared to the shift in focus of the base's defense strategy, purely technical issues were only one part of it. Of course, right now Luo Nan was only concerned with technical issues. A quarter of the training course for the promotion to field officer was about logic, a third was about work arrangements, and the rest was about specific technical ideas and requirements. But when it came to the technical explanation stage, Luo Nan's interest and his level of understanding were far from being able to reach the stage of complete encirclement. For example, the material selection and scheduling, the production line process, and the artificial intelligence content. He was like a duck listening to thunder. Only the dynamo core and some parts of the equipment structure were his cup of tea. Lieutenant Colonel Sheng Zhan spoke frankly. He was not an expert in the aspect of dimensional configuration, so he could not reconstruct the fortress itself. What he could consider was the basic logical judgment of the problems that would occur with the jade crystal array of the relay station and all sorts of equipment in the new environment, as well as the corresponding configuration design, modification, and manufacturing plans. These things did not seem to have a direct relationship with the dimensional configuration design itself, but they were the most technical content on the material plane. At the very least, they were the most logical reflections of configuration. Deducing this back, it played an extremely important role in verifying the gains and losses of Luo Nan's examination thinking back then. It was roughly equivalent to the verification or falsification of the experimental design thinking. Luo Nan was unable to directly obtain an answer, but it was precisely this mode of thinking that required retroactive reasoning that formed an even sharper sublation of his previous examination thinking. Needless to say, There were countless mature and ruthless designs that were pushed out as if they cost nothing during this process. Every plan was a classic in the essence of the heavenly Yuan Empire's tens of thousands of years of research on configuration. They corresponded to different periods, different environments, and different rules of thought on configuration design. In the training video, Lieutenant Commander Shang Zhan displayed the graceful bearing of a master. He casually picked and selected plans, or part of the essence or supplementary materials of the plans. All of them had the solid support of theory and data. He casually pointed out the possibilities and even the experiences of failure. All of them were the summaries of countless experiences. Luo Nen was practically engulfed by the knowledge that assaulted his face, as well as the happiness that followed. Only when it came to certain domains that he was not proficient in did he have the space to take a breather. If it was possible, he even hoped that this training class would continue in an endless loop. Right when he was in a wonderful state, the image in front of him suddenly froze. Luo Nen subconsciously let out an especially loud, "Hey!" This time he had some experience. He directly looked at the officer in front of him, and the officer just happened to turn his head. "Hey, kid, you're not mute, right?" Luo Nen looked at him with wide eyes. He was unable to believe that the officer had severed his mental enjoyment with just a few words. The officer saw Luo Nan's expression and frowned. "You're really mute? Did you understand?" Luo Nan took a deep breath and adjusted his mood. He still answered honestly. "The configuration design part is okay, but the other parts aren't too good." "Really?" "The configuration design. The goal is quite clear." The officer looked at Luo Nan's epaulette as he spoke, confirming Luo Nan's rank. It was hard not to be surprised in his words. "You just entered the military not too long ago. Don't tell me I encountered a top student?" "Well, even if you ask me, I don't know the answer to this domain." Though this officer's face was evil, his mouth was foul, and his grasp of timing was terrible, he was still a magnanimous person. Luo Nan smiled at him, hoping to continue the training course as soon as possible. But the officer still asked, "Which workstation are you at?" Luo Nen nearly blurted out, "Are you done yet?" "No, it was 4 to 92. "Oh, that's not right." Luckily, he corrected himself in time and answered, 1 to 95. 1-95. I remember it was Qin Han. Luo Nan recalled for a moment. Lieutenant Go Yi had said this when he was assigning work. He said, "I heard that Officer Xianzhu went to the front lines on a mission, so his workstation was transferred out." "Oh my." The officer used his untreated arm to suddenly slap his thigh. Good job. Old Go really knows me." Luo Nan was startled. "You are..." The officer's expression suddenly changed before he could say the name. His body trembled, and then he swung his arm with force. This time, it was the one receiving treatment. The medical robot, which had been working diligently all this time, was overturned to the ground with a crash. Its motor was idling, and beads of blood were flung out from its operating arm. There was also a small blood color strip. This toy fell to the ground and continued to twitch. Chapter 919. Luo Nan could clearly see that this was a muscle fiber. Thankfully, the officer reacted quickly. Otherwise, the medical robot's debridement needle knife would have cut off an entire nerve bundle of the injured right arm. The officer, who didn't have a good temper to begin with, cursed when he suddenly received this injury. He swept his leg and kicked the idling robot far away. However, the wound had already been torn open a second time, and more blood gushed out. "Officer," Luo Nen displayed a bit of concern, but a portion of his attention was focused on the deeper parts of the wound. There was also the medical robot that was nearly scrapped. The emergency Model 5 plus battlefield healing machine. It shouldn't have made this kind of mistake. It's nothing. My luck is bad. It's a vicious environment right now. Anything can happen. The officer displayed a coarse and indifferent attitude. His face, which was covered by metal prosthetics, recovered his smile. "I haven't even thanked you yet. You pushed me out of the fixed-point maintenance group. I don't need to play with these low-level machines every day. I can live for at least another 3 to 5 years." Luo Nen had already guessed this person's identity. He called out in a probing manner, "Officer Xianzhu." "Yes." It's me. Officer Xianzhu took the initiative to extend his hand. Luo Nan subconsciously thought that he was going to shake hands. But when he extended his hand, he discovered that Officer Xianzhu was going to punch him. He hurriedly corrected himself and bumped his fingers together. Luckily, Xianzhu didn't mind. In order to reduce the awkwardness, Luo Nan took the initiative to speak. I heard Officer Go say that you went to the front lines. I didn't expect you to come back this quickly. How far is the front lines? Besides, how is that considered the front lines? There's no close combat. There's only long-range coverage. At most, it's just gambling on luck in a casino. Xianzhu's and Go Ye's explanations were surprisingly similar. Perhaps veteran soldiers who had truly been to the front lines had this kind of thinking. Luo Nan saw that Officer Xianzhu's arm injury had clearly worsened as he spoke. The area of his injury extended from his upper right arm all the way to the back of his shoulder blade. The wound was irregular. It seemed to have been forcefully torn by a blunt object. Perhaps there was also a bone problem. In any case, the medical robot had already mended and stitched up most of the wound. It was just about to be wrapped up. Who would have expected that such a thing would happen? Plus, Luo Nan had a faint feeling that the problem wasn't that simple. Sir, I'll send you to the infirmary. It's meaningless. The medical module of this slime is rubbish, and it's a low-level operation in the base. It's better to use that little thing. F***CK. I trusted it so much, and it tricked me. Sergeant Xianzhu cursed and stood up at the same time. He waved his hand to stop Luo Nan from helping him up. Your time as a guard is precious. You don't need to worry about me. Just watch yourself. I'll go ponder over it. As he spoke, he walked towards the medical robot that had stopped working. From his tone, it seemed like he needed to repair it again. As expected of a repairman, he couldn't bear to see the machines malfunctioning. Luo Nan didn't listen to Xianzhu. He went straight forward and said, Officer, your current state is very bad. Nonsense. Do I need you to remind me? The nails on the bones were broken, and the nerves were severed. I had to forcibly reattach them. No, don't be so clingy. I hate talkative fellows the most. Sergeant Xianzhu's expression changed. His rough and wild temperament clearly came out. Luo Nan didn't know what to say, but Xianzhu seemed to have thought of something. He waved his undamaged left hand. Perfect. You're still in training. Leave 1 to 95 empty. Give me the authority. I'll go do a repair test. I'll take advantage of this time to solve the problem. It'll be the best of both worlds. Luo Nan thought for a bit when faced with Xianzhu's oppressive gaze. He shook his head and refused. Officer, I want to say that there should be a problem with the operation of her dynamo core. Otherwise, the emergency 5+ model battlefield healing machine will only stop and stagnate. It won't cause an error in operation. Xianzhu was stunned. You're going to teach me? I'm just guessing. Lieutenant Shengzhan just said that when the dynamo core's carrier is slightly contaminated, the conduction of the neural electrical signals will cause disorder in a specific waveband. This will cause deviations in the precise control. More importantly, it will activate the contamination judgment of the existing smart devices, causing a double error to superimpose. Clearly, there was a problem with the emergency 5+ model battlefield healing machine's judgment just now. Officer, you should have subconsciously made adjustments, forcefully using the dynamo core. The expression on Xianzhu's fierce face was subtle. Luo Nan really did talk too much from his perspective, but there were some things in Luo Nan's words that stabbed at the pit of his stomach. In the end, it's a certain fellow's brain that's been fried. Suddenly, a hoarse voice cut in. The door to the military classroom had opened a bit earlier, and Lieutenant Go Yi glided in with the support of a single prosthetic arm. Xianzhu stared at Luo Nan in the first instant. You're snitching? Luo Nan cried out in bafflement. Let's not talk about your hoarse voice. The bug is just a little big. I wouldn't even know if there was a problem with the equipment inside. I might as well throw the position of lieutenant to you. You have the nerve to say that I have a hoarse voice. Xianzhu cursed vaguely. He faced Lieutenant Go Yi and made a meaningless gesture with one hand. And then? Are you going to shove me into the medical room? Come on, is there a difference? You might as well bring another emergency 5+ over. Lieutenant Go Yi laughed amiably. Your luck isn't too good. I brought a total of 6 emergency 5+ units. Half of them have been brought to the front lines to provide support. There's also one that's malfunctioning and is currently being repaired. The other one is currently in use and won't be able to be adjusted for a while. Why don't you obediently lie down? I'll call a transport vehicle to send you back. Xianzhu exploded when he heard this. Are you kidding me? If it's broken, then fix it. If you let a baffling malfunction go back in, you'll probably make people laugh to death. Give me the 1 to 95, and I'll fix it in a few minutes. Lieutenant Go Yi shook his head. It looks like there's even a problem with his auditory nerves. Luonan said it so clearly. You've been infected by the evil poison, old man. You need to go back and have the dynamo core replaced. Lie down. Your wound is still gurgling with blood. We'll give you emergency treatment. Xianzhu spat. I said I could fix it myself. You don't want to lose face in front of the youngsters? The problem is that you've already lost face. Lieutenant Go Yi directly stabbed a knife into Xianzhu's heart. You don't even know that you've been infected. You want a private who just joined the army a few days ago to point it out. If I were you, I'd stick my face to the floor. That would barely be considered magnanimous. F***ck me. Xianzhu's Sky Abyss Kingdom cursing was roughly like this. Cursing was one thing, but this rough-tempered officer actually laid down very obediently. He even deliberately rubbed his face against the floor he had just stepped on. Is it like this? The corner of Luo Nan's mouth twitched. He was barely able to control himself. Lieutenant Go Yi turned his face at this time. Remember Officer Xianzhu's appearance. I don't want you to laugh at him in your heart. Instead, you need to understand that you can be stubborn with a few words on the battlefield, but you need to be realistic in the end. This is the reason why he's been able to live until now. It would be better if he didn't say a few words. Go Yi, I'll XXUXX. Xianzhu fiercely smashed his chin against the floor. His cursing entered a profound domain. Luo Nan began to be unable to understand it. Go Yi didn't care in the slightest. He just asked Luo Nan, how about it? Want to use him for practice? Chapter 920. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Can you have some basic trust in a newbie? The two officers and seniors cursed and chattered. Go Yi was in no hurry, and Xianzhu didn't actually jump up to refuse. Luo Nan entered his proper state, minding his own business. Though Go Yi didn't speak too clearly, as a maintenance worker, he was able to understand Go Ye's train of thought. In fact, this was also Xianzhu's train of thought. The other machines weren't idle. No matter what was done, it could only fall onto the malfunctioning medical robot. So Luo Nan walked over after responding. He crouched in front of the urgent 5+ battlefield healing machine that had no reaction at all. Fine granules flowed out from between his fingers. It was none other than the syncopator. This period of time was enough for Luo Nan to develop the habit of carrying a syncopator with him. He casually gave the machine on the ground a cut. Syncopator? Xianzhu's attention was drawn. He didn't care about bickering with Go Yi anymore. He grimaced in pain as he adjusted his angle on the ground. His cheek stuck to the ground as he turned his head to look. How is it? Go Yi asked. It's rare to see someone use a syncopator to make a diagnosis, and to do it so skillfully. Did I ask you? Go Yi gave him a sidelong glance. His action successfully made Xianzhu's eyes glow with an ominous glint. But then he just bared his teeth and grunted twice. In the end, he couldn't help but raise his voice and directly ask Luo Nan, Kid, what's the result of the syncopation? Listening to Xianzhu's words felt like taking a pulse. Of course, the Heavenly Yuan Empire probably didn't have such a thing as taking a pulse, but the meaning just so happened to match. Luo Nan answered truthfully. The mounted needle knife module was struck by an external force. There is a conduction failure. It can be repaired. The central chip was probably affected by the forceful control. It has already been burned. It needs to be replaced. Go Yi clicked his tongue. Retribution? If you say you're infected, then so be it. Why the forceful control? The Urgent 5+ is equipped with a Faction 7 chip. It has 2 storage bases and has already been sent to the front lines. The replenishment hasn't arrived yet. Xianzhu sneered. Do you think I'm stupid? The Urgent 5 Plus was bragged when it left the factory. As long as it's within the range of the Jade crystal array, the Cloud Core can compensate with near zero delay. As long as it senses and conducts, the system isn't completely finished. Are you sure you can't walk after burning a few broken chips? The smile on Go Yun's face widened. Congratulations. You've been infected, but your brain is still fine. Do you have a blueprints? I'm talking about the configuration. When it comes to long-range functions, this is very important. The last sentence was directed at Luo Nan, and Luo Nan immediately responded, yes. Perhaps Luo Nan would need to flip through the concrete details of the mechanical structure of the equipment that the Earth Layer Patroller had been in his hands for the past few days. He would need to borrow the system to filter out the plans, but the configuration designs that were separated from the physical body of the equipment were imprinted in Luo Nan's memory. He could use them at any time without any hindrance. However, Luo Nan wasn't without problems. Reporting to the lieutenant. According to the treatment data, there are 2 indicators in the state of Sergeant Xianzhu's dynamo core that have already exceeded the limits of the moderately polluted region. Moreover, it is interacting with a portion of the neurotransmitter conduction. It is not stable enough. According to the drill manual, this has already met the standards of wartime disposal. Should we? Yes. Xianzhu sucked in a breath of cold air between his lips and teeth. On one hand, it was a reaction to Luo Nan's words. On the other hand, it was a reaction to the instantaneous change in mood. The abnormal pulsation of his nervous system formed an effect. He was speechless for a time. Goyi was quite calm and collected. Oh, you want to mount the neurosurgery module, right? This is in stock. It will be delivered immediately. Warm up first. Try to guide the Cloud Core to control it from a distance. Examine it. Come up with a treatment plan first. Luo Nan obeyed Goyi's orders. He responded with a grunt, and more syntone particles flowed down between his fingers. They switched to a working state one after another. They revolved around the paralyzed robot on the ground. Not a single one of them made any substantial contact with the robot. But after circling and adjusting a few times, it was as if several incorporeal ropes were woven in the air. The medical robot became a puppet that pulled the strings. It swayed crookedly as it adjusted its posture. It used the fine adjustments of the all-terrain tracks to stand up once more. Soon, this emergency 5 Plus battlefield healing machine, which was a bit like a mini armored vehicle, started its self-examination program. Its internal sensing, conduction, and external function modules all made minute adjustments amidst the soft vibrations. The miniature repair probe, hidden within the belly of the machine, extended out. It wrapped around the already malfunctioning needle knife, mounted mechanical arm to carry out adjustments. The needle knife mechanical arm swayed left and right. It was a bit stiff at first, but its movements became smoother and smoother after a few seconds. Xianzhu switched his chin to rest on the ground. He sighed with emotion, so the 12th Equipment Department isn't full of big mouths after all. The Cloud Core compensates quite quickly. Goyi didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared fixedly in that direction. The smile on his round face faded a bit. Only when the emergency 5 Plus battlefield healing machine began to revolve in place and lock onto the direction of the target did he speak in a low voice. The problem is, I haven't approved the temporary compensation authority this toy requested from the Jade Crystal Array. Then hurry up and... Xianzhu's chin movement was too large, and he suffered a backlash from the floor. He nearly bit his tongue, but he didn't care about this. He followed up with a question. The Cloud Core isn't supported. Is this a freaking manual operation? The smile on Goyi's face reappeared, and it grew deeper. Illegal operation. Just a little bit more. Xianzhu didn't understand what Goyi meant for a time, but this didn't stop him from observing the medical robot's performance. Even though he already knew the root of the problem, in the eyes of an old maintenance worker, he was unable to distinguish the difference between the robot's movements and those of an intelligent program. That is, if the flying ants to the side were excluded. Could it be that I've encountered a genius of the precise control class? Then Xianzhu saw the healing robot, which was completely under Luo Nan's manual control. It had already locked onto Xianzhu as its target and was drawing closer to him. The tracks rolled over the ground with a series of faint sounds. The sounds passed through the floor, the chin, and the chest to penetrate the brain and disturb the heart. Stop! Xianzhu couldn't hold back from shouting. The medical robot completely synchronized with his voice and stopped advancing. Luo Nen cast a slightly puzzled gaze over. Clearly, he didn't understand Xianzhu's intentions. You're just going to operate it manually? Xianzhu only realized what was going on when the words left his mouth. He was actually a bit apprehensive, but he couldn't retract his words no matter what. He could only smash his chin against the floor again. Luo Nen grew more and more puzzled. He turned his head to look at Go Yi. Only Go Yi understood at this time that these two people's thoughts weren't on the same channel at all. But there was really no meaning in having him explain. So he simply urged his toes to tap the floor twice. The application has been approved. Prepare. An intense tremor suddenly arrived before his voice could fall. Chapter 921. Not to mention Go Yi and Xianzhu. Even Luo Nen had trained himself to turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to similar vibrations and impacts. In a slightly shaky military classroom, Go Yi only paused for a moment before continuing, prepared to connect to the local equipment. The treatment plan needs to be prepared first. Luo Nen, the situation you mentioned needs to be added into the plan. There's no need to rush the operation. That's because you're not in a hurry. In his words, there was a reversal of logic. In short, no matter who spoke, he would refute. Go Yi didn't care at all. You can think of it as a symptom of your contamination. It's true that the front lines are allowed to deal with it urgently at the moment, but if it's not a situation that takes your life immediately, it's more appropriate to use specialized equipment at the back. After all, the internal growth of the dynamo core, one's life, one's future, and one's fate all depend on it. It's better to be cautious. Xianzhu chuckled coldly. As if you don't have a dynamo core. Go Yi supported himself on the ground with one leg. As if performing acrobatics, he shook his limbless, bald torso. I'm doing this to save my life. I'm fundamentally different from certain people who lack talent and confidence. Xianzhu's ferocious face turned green, so much so that the metal prosthetics sank into his flesh. At this moment, Luo Nen practically thought that he would jump up and give the poisonous tongue Go Yi a beating. But in the end, Xianzhu only covered his mouth and nose on the floor and ordered in a muffled voice, "What are you waiting for? Do you think my butt is sexy?" Luo Nen went, "Oh," but he didn't have the awareness of being a punching bag. He responded calmly, "It's already done. According to the medical plan, it's recommended that we perform a preset signal blocking technique on the spot to prevent the nervous system from becoming chaotic and further deteriorating. Then we return to the 2 hive and perform a reset of the new dynamo core. Minor adjustments have been made to the plan for external injuries. There are basically no changes. What do you mean by going back to the second honeycomb? Maybe they'll kick me to the assembly line." Xianzhu was still using the floor to stifle his face, which corresponded to his emotions. Nothing he heard was pleasing to his ears, especially when another wave of tremors came from outside. The entire soil layer patroller was shaking more obviously, making him feel seasick as he lay on the floor. "You're not going back? Are you going to stay on the front lines and cause trouble for others?" As the superior officer, Go Yi was disinclined to pay attention to this sort of emotional reaction. He turned toward Luo Nen. "Let's begin. You must remember this. The sinful poison contamination is a contamination of the rules. For the infected, the rules have changed. Things that used to be taken for granted will completely change. For maintainers like us, let's not talk about anything else. The most terrifying thing is when you use the best methods from the drill manuals and experience to deal with the problem, but the mistake will come out of nowhere, and it will appear as if you were just occasionally unlucky. In fact, the demons were born from these mistakes and then rapidly expanded." Xianzhu laughed gloomily. "Where's your poetry recitation? Isn't it shameful to do this? If the evil poison could be explained simply and clearly, I would have become a tenured professor at the Imperial University long ago." In the end, Go Yi couldn't take it anymore and retorted, "Someone, do you want to paint yourself as a ghost? Or do you want us to pull you back? You're not the ones who can pull me back. In the end, I still have to go back and torment myself. With your position and ability, if it weren't for today's show, if Colonel Shengzhan were to glance at you from the corner of his eyes, I'd admit defeat. Xianzhu choked. He wasn't angry, but he seemed to be a bit moved. Gouyi didn't bicker with him any longer. He just said to Luo Nan, the Cloud Core compensation plan has been synchronized. Don't leave any evidence behind when you operate. Xianzhu wasn't satisfied. I'm not your exercise book? Yes. I'm not. Yes, I'm Gouyi. The full maintenance team is currently performing a maintenance mission in the front extension of the main track. Xianzhu, who had changed the channel once again, immediately shut his mouth and raised his head to look over. Gouyi went silent after his simple report, but it didn't last long. He ended the communication a few seconds later. The expression on his round face was the same as always. He only pursed his lips at Luo Nan. Serve this master well. Hurry up and get him out of here. Xianzhu wasn't annoyed at this time. He grinned. There's a mission. Gouyi really didn't pay attention to him this time. He slid back with his single leg and left without consulting anyone. Lieutenant, the one who opened his mouth to stop this time, was actually Luo Nan. He didn't think through his words and just directly sent them out. My training time. Gouyi had already retreated outside the door. He was stunned for a moment before he laughed. Remember, at the very least, I'll give you Sergeant Xianzhu's share. Luo Nan's mind relaxed, and he stood at attention in response. These bastards these days. This was the general meaning of Xianzhu's words. But no matter how incisive the words were, they would always lose some of their flavor after being translated once. Curses were the same. Luo Nan wasn't very sensitive to this. Since Gouyi had promised him, he didn't think too much about it. He returned to his focused state and stared at the robot that was beginning to perform operations without even blinking. Actually, after the Cloud Core compensation began, the relay station would allocate a certain amount of computing resources to this machine through the network system. It was no different from when the device's chip was intact. Luo Nan didn't need to worry about looking after him anymore. He could be like Xianzhu from before, minding his own business and participating in training and learning. No one would be able to say anything to him. However, Luo Nan was already used to finishing what he started on the level of configuration. Even though the work domain of the needle knife mechanical arm was quite different from what he was good at, he still hoped to be able to see a corresponding change in the configuration. In addition, according to the confirmed treatment plan, there was still a mounting module responsible for executing the signal blockage technique that hadn't come. Officer Gouyi had left in a hurry just now and forgot to mention this matter. Luo Nan was considering whether or not he should ask again. At this time, Xianzhu, who was rest-stitching the wound, began to pound the floor. This explosive temper. Mother asterisk cur. Give me some anesthesia. Xianzhu was able to laugh and talk as if nothing had happened when he directly used the knife. That was because he had used the dynamo core to block the nerve signal. Once the signal was cut off, the pain would be inconsequential. But now that the evil poison had been diagnosed, the dynamo core was as good as nothing. It had to be sealed. Xianzhu was able to endure for 20 to 30 seconds without making a sound under the needle, thread, and blade. Luo Nan didn't know if he was a tough guy or if he was slow. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Luo Nan promptly apologized. But what was the use of apologizing now? Luo Nan saw that Xianzhu's face was distorted. He needed to quickly block the transmission of pain. Drugs and the like wouldn't make it in time. In his desperation, Luo Nan simply waved his hand and tossed out a syncopator like scattering beans. It must be said that Luo Nan had a deep understanding of the structure of the human skeleton and its corresponding configuration. But when it came to specific targeted operations, Luo Nan was limited by his experience. He lacked experience when it came to small techniques like precise anesthesia. Luo Nan didn't have a choice, so he simply used the syncopator to analyze Xianzhu's current state and make adjustments. Xianzhu's forehead was covered in cold sweat from the pain. He watched as dozens of flying ants spiraled down. Some of them even stuck to his wounds. He couldn't help but be a bit stupefied, but the effects were good. He could faintly feel a bit of a unique interference force. He heard the buzzing of the flying ants and the intense pain that nearly tore his shoulder blade apart, but it was like a dream. He suddenly woke up from it, and the pain disappeared without a trace. The pain and the cold sweat from the stress reaction quickly subsided, but his curiosity rose. He stirred up his tongue, which he had just bitten open, and he spoke over and over again. "Oh, this is interesting. Your hand looks familiar to me. You used the syncopator to adjust the configuration and then used reverse interference, right? No wonder Goyi was talking about you. Don't think that just because you have the skin of a syncopator, I can't see that you're violating the rules. Luo Nan, you're super daring. Strictly speaking, you're very restrained. Unfortunately, it's not that you're cautious. It's more like you're forcefully controlling from start to finish. Who taught you this?" Lieutenant Goyi. Luo Nan told the truth. "I knew it. He's the only one who studies these bizarre toys. He's a fan of the classical school. It's only because he's old and he's crippled that he's a bit quieter. His greatest joy right now is to teach you youngsters these meaningless things." Luo Nan frowned. He didn't want to listen to this kind of expression. He stiffly retorted, "I think it's pretty good. I like a lot." Xianzhu heard this and turned his face to the side. He sized up Luo Nan from top to bottom. Then he returned to his chin resting on the floor posture. "You like it? It's good that you like it. You're much cuter than those practical types who ask if it's useful or not. I also think it's very useful." Luo Nan didn't get the chance to say these words before Xianzhu spoke again. "It has to be passed down. Goyi loves to say things like this. He also says things like, 'I'm trapped in the Hongguang system right now, but I'll return to normal in the future. If I have some spare energy, I might as well do some preparatory work. I can't abandon normal things just because I'm living a shitty life right now.' And so on and so forth. He hasn't said these words to you yet. He'll have to say them sooner or later. You can recite them first. You'll give him a pleasant surprise later." Xianzhu laughed to himself. His laughter shook his chest, spreading to the wounds on his arm and shoulder. He was already anesthetized, so he didn't feel anything. However, he forced the robot to adjust the details of the operation. Only then would the robot not flip a second time. Luo Nan subconsciously pressed down with his hand, not letting Xianzhu move recklessly. The door to the military classroom opened once more at this time. A multifunctional, it had been modified into a transport robot. Luo Nan saw the special mounting module for the Emergency 5 plus battlefield healing machine with a single glance. With this, the signal blocking technique wouldn't be a problem. As expected, Lieutenant Goyi was very reliable. Luo Nan let out a sigh of relief. He signaled the transport robot to move closer. Clang! The sudden noise didn't come from the military classroom. It came from an unknown region within the Earth Layer Patroller. Before Luo Nan could distinguish it clearly, another wave of vibration came over. It was more intense than the previous two. It was far too intense. This wave of vibration had an extremely strong continuity. It didn't seem like the usual intentional and intermittent eruptions. It was more like the firecrackers on Earth. They crackled and crackled as they connected. Of course, this magnitude was more than 10 million times heavier. Even the repeated explosions overlapped with each other. They quickly blended into a sheet of pure impact. They passed through the conduction of air molecules to crush the Earth Layer Patroller. The floor of the military classroom, where Luo Nan and Xianzhu were located, was already visibly slanting. The transport robot that was moving back nearly crashed into Luo Nan's chest. And after this great swaying, the entire Earth Layer Patroller seemed to be undulating and swaying amidst the waves of the sea. It looked like it would collapse at the slightest disagreement. Beep! All on-duty personnel of the full maintenance team, remain in your stations. Those who leave your stations must return within 1 minute. All maintenance activities must cease. The ship is about to enter a high-speed propulsion state. Chapter 922. What the hell was going on? At this very moment, similar thoughts probably flashed through the minds of the maintenance soldiers in the Earth Patroller. However, in the military, they would not explain the so-called ins and outs to you. Luo Nan was stupefied for half a second, but Xianzhu, who was lying on the floor, straightened his body with a whoosh the moment the command arrived. Unsurprisingly, the operation process was seriously disrupted. It was an emergency 5+ alarm. Xianzhu completely ignored it. He just urged Luonan, hurry, hurry, hurry. If you don't want to be a sandwich, then go to your workstation. Luonan instinctively responded with a yes, but he saw that Xianzhu was about to push away the needle-knife robotic arm. Most of the suturing operation had already been completed, and all of his previous efforts would be wasted. Luonan reacted without thinking. He shouted, "Wait," and pushed Xianzhu's hand away. Luonan didn't wait for Xianzhu to respond. He stabilized his balance on the swaying floor, bent down, and exerted strength. He picked up the 30-kilogram robot. At the same time, he extended his leg and kicked the mounted neurosurgery module that the transport robot had just delivered. It was flung towards Xianzhu. This set of operations flowed like clouds and water. It was done in one go, proving the practical value of the basic fighting techniques that Gym Master Xiao had taught Luonan. Xianzhu's eyes were glued to Luonan's series of operations. He instinctively used his undamaged arm to catch the mounted module that was still in its packaging state. Then, he was urged by Luonan, "Hurry up, 1-95. Xianzhu frowned. "Rookie, have you never read the drill manual? At times like this, non-station personnel need to gather in the command room." Though he said this, he allowed Luonan to push him. The two maintained a relative distance as they jogged outside. As an experienced veteran, Xianzhu played the role of leading the way. The auxiliary AI did indeed have a direct route to the destination, but it would never tell Luonan how to find a suitable point of leverage within the bumpy and swaying Earth Layer patroller. This way, Luonan would be able to maintain a fast speed and not lose his balance. As for the medical robot in Luonan's arms, it was worthy of being the most trusted emergency treatment tool of the Sky Abyss military for the past several decades. After a few seconds of humming and adjusting, he finally found the feeling again. While Xianzhu ran and jumped, he continued with the unfinished surgery. As for the flaws that might result from this, who would care about it now? Right now, the virtual world of Luonan's left eye only had a route guide to the target location and a blood-red countdown timer marking the 1000th percentile. All of the basic interface layouts had disappeared. It was a field of emptiness, but it was clearly gestating an even more serious follow-up event. It was hard for Luonan's mind to turn to other thoughts after the initial instinctive reaction had passed. But before he could understand what was going on, Xianzhu suddenly spoke from the side in front of him. "Yes, understood. Workstation 1-95, temporary team." Luonan was stunned for a moment. He was pulled into a temporary channel at nearly the same time. He heard Go Ye's warning to Xianzhu. "You've lost your major for now, but don't be a cripple." Xianzhu spat. "How dare you say that?" There's another person." Luonan saw it as well. Liang Lu had just joined in the temporary channel. This was Go Ye's introduction. 2 rookies, 0 battlefield experience. Right now, they're under your command. The authority has been delegated to you. Right at this moment, an elevator already opened and waiting appeared before Luonan and Xianzhu's eyes. The two rushed in one after the other, and the carriage quickly descended. Xianzhu said a corny joke that was hard to understand in the temporary channel. "Did I just plunge all the way to the bottom?" Go, you didn't give any more private orders. Instead, he suddenly called out to Liang Lu, who had just been pulled over. "Officer Xian? Luonan? Stay focused, little fellows." Xianzhu flaunted his seniority in a tone of voice. It was unknown what Liang Lu was thinking. In any case, Xianzhu didn't make another sound after saying this. Hopefully, he would get used to this sooner. Luonan's thoughts flashed, and the carriage door opened. Luonan's independent workstation appeared before his eyes. It was practically no different from workstation 4-92. Well, the situation with the two people hadn't changed. As the two people entered their workstations, this place entered a completely sealed state. The 1-minute countdown stopped. The virtual interface of his left eye entered a heart-palpitating state of complete emptiness. Luonan looked at Xianzhu. Officer, you sit. As he spoke, he placed the healing robot on the ground. Xianzhu cursed. He was limited by the length of the needle blade mechanical arm, so he had no choice but to sit cross-legged on the ground. He instantly became shorter than Luo Nan. The thoughts in Luo Nan's mind weren't that complicated. He just needed to free up his hands to inspect the concrete state of the workstation. First, he synchronized the data. There were no problems. Next, he checked the connection to the vertical collar dynamo core, signal conduction, and control. There were no problems either. There was also the maintenance mission. Luo Nan's figure swayed, and the vertical isolation cover in front of him suddenly made a pressing motion. It pressed down on his position, and the control panel in front of him was pushed forward. Luo Nan instinctively lowered his body to avoid a head-on collision. In the end, he sat down on the floor and was once again level with Xianzhu. Only now did Luo Nan remember that he had seen a similar situation in his previous simulation. The Earth Layer Patroller was about to transform. It transformed from a maintenance mode to a high-speed propulsion mode. The internal transformation of the workstation was roughly like this. The upper and lower space was compressed, but the deeper space was slightly adjusted and enlarged. The overall space was compressed by at least half. There's already one more person and one more machine, so the space became even narrower. And because the isolation cover pressed down, the light from the outside world was completely cut off. The entire workstation shrunk to the abdomen of the large bug. The illumination was a bit dim, making the space feel even more cramped. Luo Nan and Xianzhu squeezed together. The healing robot could only be placed on their knees. Since their positions weren't right, the treatment could only be paused. The smell of blood from the open wound pervaded the narrow space. Luo Nan didn't think much of it. He just recalled the contents of the one and only drill, fumbling with the control mode that had already changed. Oh, it seemed like something was missing. Looking for a protective ring? Xianzhu chuckled twice. There should be a protective ring following us at this time, but a certain godly operator brought in a rapid 5+. It just so happens that we can experience the thrill of racing without any protection. We're just missing tactical mobility. Luo Nan let out an "oh" in response. Xianzhu spat. Rookie recruit. You can't be saved. Though Xianzhu said this, the veteran Xianzhu still pulled out 2 sets of magnetic ribbons from the narrow space. This was a relatively primitive manual fixing device. It was a backup safety measure in the event of a malfunction of the workstation protective ring. Under Xianzhu's guidance, Luo Nan connected the ribbons to a few hidden anchors on the combat uniform, completing the most basic of defenses. At the same time, Xianzhu contacted Liang Lu through the temporary channel. Share your status, rookie. You need to show the value of enlisting half a year earlier. Liang Lu. Yes. In any case, Luo Nan and Liang Lu, these 2 recruits who had just experienced battle, completed everything they needed to do during the transformation period of the Earth Layer Patroller under Xianzhu's rough supervision. Luo Nan even had a bit of time to find the control command for the panoramic simulation. The large bug buzzed as it started to accelerate, and the scene of the outside was reflected once more. He saw the dense mass of self-propelled machines below the abdomen of the robot. They seemed to never decrease in number. They were like wheat fields that had been struck by a storm under the impact of the incessant vibrations. Large swathes of machines collapsed to the point of being deformed. It was unknown how much work had been completed or nearly completed, but it had been reduced to 0. This could be considered a small sigh from a rookie maintenance soldier. Xianzhu didn't have this sort of emotion. He just swept a glance and reminded Luo Nan, "Mission. Look at the mission in front of you." Luo Nan's left eye's virtual interface was synchronized with his words. A new scene jumped out on the walls of the enclosed cabin that had panoramic simulation activated. The 2 were completely the same. An animated demonstration of a long and narrow crevice appeared in the center of the area. The marked information was Perpetual Broken Rock Construction, blueprint number GI 077. Then there was the shrinking and expanding surrounding area, as well as the real-time status. Luo then had the most complete architectural blueprint of the relay station stored in his mind. He was able to quickly discern that the location was below the front line blocking position. It could be considered the outermost territory of the base. Xianzhu cursed vaguely. Infrastructure repairs during wartime. This small bug won't be able to fill it even if I stuff 10 more of it. The Earth Layer Patroller was originally known as the large bug, but it suddenly became small. But there wasn't a single problem with Xianzhu's description. Out of the series of maintenance missions in the base, the one with the greatest difficulty and the highest risk factor was undoubtedly the maintenance of infrastructure. The infrastructure facilities of the base possessed the dual attributes of bearing and defense. They were certainly the most sturdy materials and the most reliable designs. It was fine if they didn't have any problems. But if something did happen, it meant that there was a huge problem with the defense system. The effect on other areas and the reaction from other areas were enough to make one's head swell. In terms of maintenance itself, many materials were used to repair it. There were many variables, and it took a long time. More importantly, the enemy wasn't a fool. How could they give you the chance to repair it calmly? Luo Nin pursed his lips as he stared at the mission icon. His eyes focused. How could it be broken? If this place was broken, wouldn't that mean that the space-time barrier return? Xianzhu smacked the back of Luo Nan's head with his palm. This time, he was really ruthless. Even the surrounding vertical collar dynamo cores had a moment of signal chaos. Luo Nan turned his head in shock, but he saw Xianzhu staring at him. A layer of dense white light suffused Xianzhu's fierce face. Xianzhu looked at Luo Nan, but he also looked at Liang Lu. Listen to my advice. Don't bring your brain. Right now, the ones whose brains are going to explode are logistics, Shangzhan, Hui, Tang, Yin, and the other knights. As frontline maintenance personnel, all you need to do is work properly. You guys can't seal off the holes in your brains. You want to be saviors, but don't want to be a military judge. Beep. The notification sounded once more. The Earth Layer Patroller was clearly still moving forward. At most, it was slowing down. The workstation space had already begun to deform and reset. As the panoramic simulation warped and switched, Luo Nan saw the thick and heavy steel barrier in front of him. There was a thick crack that ran straight down. Luo Nan didn't know if it was an illusion of light, but the depths of the crack seemed to be filled and flowing with the light of fire. Chapter 923. After the beep, Lieutenant Go Yi issued an order through the broadcast. Everyone, pay attention. You are about to enter an area of abnormal rules. Don your armor and execute a type of formation. Unarmored personnel are forbidden from being exposed to all non-enclosed areas. The broadcast was still ongoing. A flat, box-shaped mechanical construct rose from the lower part of the workstation, which was gradually deformed and reset. It slid to the side of Luo Nan's feet, who was still held in place by the magnetic belt. A slight ringing sound rang out behind Luo Nan's ear, echoing with the toy from a distance. This was proof of his status and authority. The mechanical construct suddenly deformed. The main material was clearly cold metal, but under the disassembly and assembly of complex and precise parts, it was like a sticky living thing that clung to Luo Nan's leg. It quickly spread to his waist and abdomen. The magnetic belt automatically unraveled, giving space to this mechanical construct. In another breath of time, this exoskeleton armor covered Luo Nan's entire body. It connected with his external vertical collar dynamo core. His breathing automatically entered the life support module and coordinated with the external energy furnace. Every time Luo Nan breathed, the armor seemed to expand and contract. It was as if the several dozen kilograms of metal had the same pulse. Technician's armor is a classic 7th edition. The attack and defense modules exist for the sake of maintaining its functionality. It's a typical example of a partner being happier than the user. Xianzhu gave a timely explanation from the side. As for Luo Nan, there were no changes at all. Don't doubt it. The so-called unarmored personnel is talking about me and himself. Xianzhu pointed at the operation that was still ongoing on his back. Needless to say, there was still the infected endogenous dynamo core that was bound to his nervous system. Under these circumstances, it might be safer for him to be in unarmored personnel. The workstation space had already been restored as they spoke. The slight tilt didn't affect Luo Nan at all. Luo Nan naturally stood up. The all-encompassing metal visor automatically enhanced with panoramic simulation. It transformed the light signals of the outside world into a form that people were accustomed to seeing. But it also marked a deeper level of analytical data. Therefore, Luo Nan saw and measured the size of the crack that was rapidly approaching before his eyes. In the end, Luo Nan was able to see it. The infrastructure module labeled Gen 077 was created through a microscopic biological community similar to polyps. It was fed with energy on a large scale. It rapidly multiplied, guided, dyed, metallized, and shaped. Its vertical height was more than 140 meters, and it was deeply embedded in the rock layer. Its width was more than 200 meters, and its thickness was a jaw-dropping one, 4 kilometers. In other words, this was an artificially bred mountain. Since it had been fed since it was young, it was possible to design it before it was constructed. During the construction, special guidance technology could be used to set up spaces and channels inside the mountain. Of course, what was more important was the required structure and energy pathways. The structure of the relay station's space-time fortress was closely related to these infrastructure modules, and they complemented each other. Just looking at such a colossus was enough to make one feel dejected. But now an astonishing fissure was torn from the bottom all the way to the top, and it was from the outside to the inside. It pierced through the obstruction of light, allowing this terrifying scar to appear before Luo Nan's eyes. The Soil Patrol was a medium-sized maintenance platform. Even though it had shrunk after its transformation, it could still fit dozens of people. It was at least the size of a minibus. However, if such a platform were to be filled, it would barely be able to fill the crack at the bottom. Luo Nan immediately understood the meaning behind Xianzhu's words. Such an enormous project was absolutely not something that could be solved by a dozen or so maintenance soldiers. But here came a question. How did the fissure happen? Even though Xianzhu had warned him beforehand, Luo Nan couldn't help but think about it. The new space-time fortress design was his work in the logic of the Interverse simulator. Luo Nan's previous self-righteous design had already brought about a major and negative influence to the relay station. Now, even the most basic defensive function had a problem. Before Luo Nan could finish his thought, the Soil Patrol had already recovered to its working state. After a limited deceleration, it charged into the depths of the fissure. The number of photons passing through the isolation shield instantly decreased by several magnitudes, but it was still enough for illumination. As for the most eye-catching part, it came from the long trail of fiery light in front of Luo Nan's eyes. But at the same time, the two sides of the fissure flickered with specks of light. Some of them looked more like the cross-section of an electrical circuit. Luo Nan could even see lightning piercing through the air to connect to the two sides of the fissure. It was like a lotus root was broken and the thread was still connected. The Soil Patrol pierced through these leaping bolts of lightning. Luo Nan narrowed his eyes behind his visor as he looked at these things. If he wasn't mistaken, these were all energy nodes embedded in the configuration. Even though a considerable portion of them had already been destroyed, the ones that still existed were still attempting to reassemble and restore their preset functional structure. So direct and efficient. Forcefully cleaved open, Luo Nan and Xianzhu's words rang out at practically the same time. However, Xianzhu didn't have his visor to cover his words. His tone was even clearer. This is the work of a senior lord. With another attack like this, all of us will turn to dust. Cleave open? This level of offensive power. You must be joking. Oh, Luo Nan couldn't help but glance back. Who was the one who said not to use their brains just now? Liang Lu sent a message in the temporary team's internal channel at this time. He wasn't very confident, but he still expressed his own opinion. The line of fire ahead, and this sort of laceration. Is it the Hellfire Tyrant? Fine. Another person who used their brains. Luonan used the AI to inquire about the Hellfire Tyrant's information, but then a set of coordinates was sent out in the temporary channel. Soon, it combined with the overall scene of the animation demonstration to mark out the directly visible area. The animation demonstration had already made it clear that the crack extended all the way to the outside of the relay station base. It formed a perfectly straight canyon tunnel that was 1,400 meters long. The area in front of the tunnel bore the heaviest force, approximately 400 meters. It was completely covered in flames, and it was precisely where Luonan and the others saw the fiery streak of sky. The newly set coordinates were behind the flames, approximately 300 meters away from the mouth of the crack. Set up a temporary blocking position at the coordinates. The specific standard requirements for the position came after the brief order. Luonan Gang swept his eyes over. The distance between the Earth City patroller and the fiery streak of sky was practically non-existent. Only at this distance did he discover that the flames on the other side were still endlessly extending forward. Buzz! The soil patrol truly began to break, but the kinetic energy of its forward charge still drove it to break through the barrier of flames ahead. The soil patrol's head fell down towards the bottom region of the crack. Chapter 924. Prepare for impact. Lieutenant Goyi issued another command. Luonan, who was already wearing the exoskeleton armor, had over 10 methods to easily stabilize his body. He just turned his head to glance and saw that Xianzhu was still held in place by magnetic belts. He relaxed and cast his gaze outside once more. It was at this time that he heard Xianzhu laugh. This is the best viewing platform. Luonan didn't understand. His mind was already attracted by the leaping flames in the outside world. Even with the 2 layers of filtering from the metal visor and the isolation cover, the high-energy jet that gushed and flowed outside was still extremely eye-catching. Of course, this was due to the deep data analysis of the panoramic simulation system, which allocated large amounts of computing power to this phenomenon. Right now, the 11 maintenance soldiers on the Earth Layer Patroller had already constructed a standard array. From Luonan's perspective, this was the complete or upgraded version of the formatted space constructed by the burners back on Earth. But at the same time, it was a weakened version on the mental plane. The 11 people in the array were interconnected with each other's energies. Even though they were more conservative in their use on the mental plane, they were able to closely coordinate and form a joint force with the support of the same system. Luonan, who had a relatively high level of cultivation in the mental side, was able to sense how strands of his soul strength were divided, converging into the tight structure of the array, and how it was used in an orderly manner. He had a similar experience when he was partnered with Liang Lu before, but that 2-person structure was far too simple. It was far inferior to the precision and standard he was seeing now. What's more, the flames were soaring and the high temperature of the external environment was 1,000 times more complicated and intense than the light pollution of the evil poison. The different operational rules inside and outside interfered and collided on the surface of contact. Even though Luonan's mental senses were severely restricted, he was still able to sense more valuable information. So much so that he nearly believed that the command issued by Lieutenant Goyi to prepare for impact was issued on this level. Half a second later, the violent collision corrected the direction of Luonan's thoughts. The Earth Layer Patroller, after having a limited deceleration, still fiercely smashed into the burning ground of the area of fire at a speed of at least 150 kilometers per hour. Arthropod number 1, which Luonan was on, and arthropod number 6, which was side by side, were located at the very front of the Soil Patroller's 3 sets of arthropod limbs. During the transformation and repositioning process, arthropod number 1 just so happened to be in a forward extending state. It was like the arms of a diver being extended forward. It was the first of all the modular parts of the Soil Patroller to make contact with the fiery ground. Luonan would never have imagined such a scene a few seconds ago. He looked at the flames pouncing on his face from outside the barrier and the ground that looked as solid as steel. There was an instant when the speed and amplitude of his heartbeat definitely exceeded the normal range. But Luonan was just a hair too late. He was able to capture the highly coordinated configuration combination of the standard array, the Earth layer patroller, and the materials of the ground. He subconsciously said, "Oh." It was hard to tell if he was surprised, frightened, or pleasantly surprised. The violent impact reverberated back, and Luonan's armored figure pounced forward under the effect of inertia. He was just about to slam into the control desk when the standard array and the Earth Patroller's anti-collision program activated at the same time. Luonan's body seemed to have been electrified amidst the buzzing and vibrating sounds. His body felt numb from head to toe, but the impact force was enough to cause fatal damage to his internal organs when he slammed into the barrier. But it was dissolved layer by the electrified vibrations. Aside from a bit of dizziness and a bit of sweat, there were no other effects. The force that was impossible to dispel was derived from the standard array through the highly efficient impact conduction system. It extended into the mechanical structure of the Earth Patroller, and then it was derived from the outer armor. It formed a powerful howling whirlwind amidst the flames and the collapsed building materials behind the ship, which was still rapidly sliding and tearing the ground apart. It was an astonishing power. From Luonan's perspective, this set of hardcore standard array application technique of exerting force and dispelling force was truly astonishing. Oh, not bad. Your legs aren't weak. You can stand firm. Just this alone will make the vast majority of people eat dust behind her heels. Xianzhu still had the leisure to praise Luonan. It was just that his voice was a bit hoarse after speaking for a bit longer. He even coughed twice. It was clear that the impact of the hard landing just now was too much for him, who wasn't wearing armor. Luonan grinned. He didn't know why, but he was sweating quite a bit. Soon, a thin layer of sweat seeped through his body, and it was sucked dry by the lining of his combat uniform. He was as refreshing as ever, just a bit floaty. It couldn't be that he was so shocked that his legs went weak, right? Luonan was embarrassed to respond to Xianzhu's reaction. He could only shut his mouth. He wanted to turn his head to look at Xianzhu's situation, but Lieutenant Go Yi had already issued an order. Hurry, hurry, hurry! Install the docking module according to the temporary group. You have a quarter of an hour. Lieutenant Go Yi was obviously talking about Heaven Abyss time. Converted to Earth's standard time, it was only about 8 minutes. Luonan had never experienced such a battle before. He was a bit stupefied for a time. He didn't know where to start. At this time, Luonan could see Go Ye's good intentions in having Xianzhu join their group. As a veteran maintenance officer, Xianzhu's experience in this area was explosively rich. His mouth was reckless in making comments, but there was no lack of work that needed to be done. While Lieutenant Go Yi was urging them once more, he had already refined the tasks assigned to their group a step further and assigned them to Luonan and Liang Lu. Number 1 and number 4. Just right, one in front and one in the back. Don't panic. It's just digging earth and building a frame. The Earth Layer Patroller finally came to a stop after sliding for 70 to 80 meters. It had already torn a long, perfectly straight scar in the foundational material that was both metal and cement on the ground. However, its final stopping point was precisely the pre-constructed area of the blocking position, which was around 300 meters away from the front lines. It displayed the first-rate control skills of its operator. Right now, the Earth Layer Patroller was like a mole cricket half sticking out of the ground from Luonan's perspective. Its 6 limbs, front and back, left and right, were all plucking at the layer of earth. It endlessly expanded and flattened the foundation of the area where the ship was located. Of course, this sort of operation ultimately relied on automatic control. Luonan and Liang Lu were able to free up their hands after the earliest setup. They accepted Xianzhu's assignment and continuously took out all sorts of spare parts stored within the Earth Layer Patroller in between excavating the Earth. They hoisted them to various designated areas. Luonan was inexplicably doing the work of excavating and hoisting, but he wasn't annoyed. This was because he was quite interested in the Earth Layer Patroller, the standard array, and the corresponding relationship between the configuration of the foundational modules used by the two. This sort of method wasn't like the space-to-point permeation technique that Liang Lu spoke of. It was more like a more pure problem of configuration. Though the Earth Layer Patroller unceremoniously cut open a portion of the surface of the tunnel area, the relationship between the two grew more and more intimate. As the blocking position was built, the two worked hard to become one. Luo, Nan, and the others, who were the controllers, used the standard array to play a clear role in catalysis. Because of this, the Earth Layer Patroller that plunged headfirst into the fiery zone was the same as connecting to the half-dead space-time defense configuration nodes within the foundational modules of the foundational modules in the fire-type law environment, bringing them to life. It was also like building a high-power jammer and signal tower. It made the surrounding area of abnormal rules become less unified and coordinated. At the very least, the stability and sustainability of the fiery zone were clearly a bit chaotic in the surrounding area where the Earth Layer Patroller sat. Although it was said to be building a blocking position, it was actually doing the preparatory work for an overall repair. The commander in the back had a very clear mind. Luo Nen had a deeper understanding of the mission objectives assigned to him by Go Yi and Xianzhu under the premise of this understanding. He could be considered to know the how and why of the mission objectives. Slowly, the work on Luo Nan's hand began to speed up. It started around 3 minutes later, and he no longer needed Xianzhu to break it down in detail. Luo Nan knew what he needed to do when Go Yi made the arrangements. Later on, he could even make some preparations in advance. The work on hand grew smoother and smoother. Correspondingly, the space for his thinking grew more and more ample. The space for divergence grew larger and larger. His train of thought gradually flew away. Unfortunately, Luo Nan could only let his train of thought fly for now. The outside world was a special law environment characterized by flames. Under the premise of standard operation, it was still very hard to grasp the deeper details, even with the amplification of the standard array. If this was on Earth, Luo Nan would certainly have just brushed through a wave of pure sensing. But in the current scene, he needed to use a certain physical medium to accomplish this point. Luo Nan really wanted to use a syncopator to cut it. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't mess around. Xianzhu's words entered Luo Nan's ears in a timely manner. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. Xianzhu certainly couldn't see the changes in Luo Nan's expression through the metal visor, but Xianzhu still had an expression that said, "I knew you wouldn't be peaceful." Only now did Luo Nan discover that there were already a few flying ants circling around his hand. Even he himself didn't know when they were released. That big rookie over there. His brain isn't listening, but his knowledge is enough. The Hellfire Tyrant. Speaking of which, youngsters these days have been raised too well in the Jade Crystal Array. Do they have no concept of the might of the sovereign domain? No, it really is the Hellfire Tyrant. Luo Nan wasn't the only one who quickly got on the right track. Liang Lu, who had a solid foundation in the domains of configuration and creation, had already adapted to the work on hand. He was able to divert his attention to participate in the discussion. Xianzhu grinned. He grabbed the needle knife mechanical arm that had just left his shoulder after completing the treatment. He performed a quick disassembly before smashing it towards Luo Nan's face. If you want to die, then King Chop. I won't have to waste time collecting your corpse. You better remember the following external work. Chapter 925. Common name, Hellfire Tyrant. Type, Outworld Species. Danger level, Calamity. Uncontrollable restlessness. Born in an extremely harsh, special space-time environment. Once it enters the local space-time, it will rapidly decline. It has no concept of friend or foe. It must constantly kill and seize life force rich in restless emotions in order to maintain its survival. Only after seizing enough life force and completing a temporary transformation will it stop killing and enter the nearest star to use fusion energy to leave. Output, Hellfire Gray Crystal, etc. Case study. Note, any Hellfire Tyrant that enters the local space-time at its peak is undoubtedly at the Great Sovereign level. It possesses the most top-notch explosive lethality of its level. The auxiliary AI displayed the basic information regarding the Hellfire Tyrant in the virtual world. The last paragraph was highlighted in bold and highlighted in red as a reminder. Was this giving him, the designer of the new version of the space-time fortress, some face? It was reasonable that the space-time fortress was unable to withstand the most tyrannical eruption of a powerhouse whose concept was unclear for the time being. What the hell? The only thing that was clear right now was why the opponent didn't strike while the iron was hot after the world-shaking first strike and expand the results of the battle. It wasn't that he didn't want to, it was that he couldn't. The stream of flames that remained within the fissure tunnel was most likely the embers of the Hellfire Tyrant's most powerful level of power that had appeared out of nowhere. Luonin grinned. The sound of the needle blade mechanical arm smashing against his visor still seemed to reverberate in his ears. Officer Xianzhu was truly angry at that moment. It was for no other reason than that Luo Nan dared to stroke the tiger's whiskers of a great sovereign level outworld species. Luo Nan attempted to use the syncopator to touch the deeper source of power in the extremely dangerous environment of abnormal laws. If Luo Nan really did it, he wouldn't be the only one who would suffer the backlash. Everyone who had formed the standard array with him would. Then, in this game scene, Luo Nin would likely be selected as a key casualty example of the Heavenly Yuan Empire's military security training this year, under the name Luo XX. His name would be widely spread throughout the entire concealed light galaxy. Luo Nin knew that he had nearly done something stupid, but it was hard for him to defend himself. He could only borrow Go Ye's orders to do external work and leave his workstation with his tail between his legs. He buried his head in his work, no longer searching for those fantastical and wonderful thoughts, the source of the disaster. Of course, he would have to run 30 meters away to find the remnants of the Hellfire Tyrant's flames, even if he wanted to cut it once. Before that, he, who had disobeyed orders and left his post, would have been killed by the military judge. However, there was something strange. Hey, Luonan, don't get distracted. Okay. Luonan put on his armor and left the sealed area after the external assignment was issued. He began to deal with more complicated matters, and his partner returned to the beginning. At that moment, Liang Lu was also fully clad in armor. With the augmentation of the exoskeleton armor, his figure grew to 4 meters tall. His visor was cold and awe-inspiring, making him look much more ferocious. However, his voice didn't change. Don't worry, I've already explained it to Sergeant Xianzhu. You are the kind of person who has sacrificed your common sense. Thank you. Sergeant Xianzhu's violent temper is famous in the logistics department. He doesn't have a family and has always stayed in the army. His temperament is a bit eccentric, and he speaks frankly, but his heart really isn't bad. Don't take it to heart. How could I? Luonan absolutely wouldn't blame others for his own stupidity. What was troubling him right now wasn't his relationship with Xianzhu. Instead, it was the noise. Luo Nin decided not to investigate the abnormal law environment of the fiery zone any further. He did his best not to think about it, but he didn't know why. But the gush of burning flames always hovered in his mind, faintly discernible. Plus, he would feel an inexplicable sense of dizziness whenever his gaze lingered on the fiery zone in the distance. He hated the faintly discernible noise even more. It lingered and reverberated in his ears. Could this be the backlash of the Hellfire Tyrant's control over the law? But I haven't cut it yet. Luonan couldn't understand. In comparison, the work at hand was far too clear and tight. According to Luonan's familiarity with Earth time, approximately 6 to 7 minutes had passed since Lieutenant Go Yi issued the order to construct the blocking position. The time limit of the order was about to arrive, and an extremely clear outline of the blocking position had already appeared. Just like the previous design, it was a soil patroller maintenance platform that was sitting on the beach as the cornerstone. It was highly compatible with the surrounding infrastructure modules. Like building blocks, it was a basic component that had been added. It was just that the component was a bit larger. If one were to take a picture of the fissure tunnel 6 minutes ago and the current scene, one would be able to see, The fissure had been forcefully torn open at a location 300 meters from the front of the tunnel. The lower region of the fissure had been sealed up once again. The height was approximately 20 meters, and it could already be considered a tall wall. The materials used to build the infrastructure module were the plate builder Zerg. Most of the energy reserves of the Earth Layer Patroller were poured into it and connected to the nodes of the space-time fortress, forming a relatively dense energy path. Only then was it finally catalyzed. Within 6 minutes, the tall and sturdy city was completed in one go. There were many functional areas within the fortress that took shape as a single entity. The defense troops that followed set up polarizing shields, close-range defense cannons, beam weapons, and so on. They transformed the fortress into a rather large blocking position. Perhaps it was more appropriate to call a fortress. There weren't just a few maintenance soldiers in the fortress right now. During the construction process of a few minutes, 3 squads of defense troops were ordered to come over to provide support. There were also maintenance, medical, and other special troops that arrived one after another. In addition, a portion of the squads that had retreated from the intense battle at the front lines were also resting and breathing here. They were also temporarily reorganized according to the needs. All sorts of officers and soldiers were stationed here. Over 70 people had already been arranged to stay here. The highest commander of the blocking position had already been replaced by Field Officer Meng Fan, who had just retreated from the front lines. Meng Fan had injuries on his body and was currently receiving treatment, but his thoughts were clear. Though he had taken over at the last minute, he still arranged everything neatly and orderly based on the foundation established by Lieutenant Goyi. This was especially true for the coordinated operation of the standard array. Under a relatively complex environment of rules, an outstanding commander who had experienced 100 battles could produce an enormous positive effect. There were over 70 people in the position. Admittedly, the number of people wasn't all that eye-catching when compared to the front lines of the battlefield at the front lines of the tunnel. There was no lack of elite NCOs and lieutenants among them. The dense, tight, and never-ending power structure gave people ample support. It was as if everyone's energy was inexhaustible and inexhaustible. In addition, they were successfully combined with the configuration environment of the space-time barrier. Under the coordination of the inside and the outside, some work was pushed forward smoothly. Luo Nan, who was carrying out external work, had the most direct feeling. Right now, Luo Nan was responsible for debugging the energy conversion module at the front lines of the position. According to the relevant drill manual, the dozen or so connectors of the module had to be tested uniformly. These connectors were interconnected. If a single error exceeded the standard, the entire test would have to be redone. In the past, this sort of work was handed over to the experienced and steady old maintenance personnel to do. Luo Nin didn't even have the qualifications to do this. But now, under the deployment of Lieutenant Commander Meng Fan, over half of the elite maintenance officers of their full maintenance team had been dispatched to the front lines to carry out battlefield repairs and support the tense battle situation. Most of the work on this side was left to the 2 rookies, Liang Lu and Luo Nan. Luo Nan had made up his mind to study and research deeply. But when he really got started, he discovered that the complex module debugging work didn't live up to its name. He didn't need to calculate and adjust these multi-headed modules at all. It was as if they had their own magnetic suction force. As long as the approximate position was correct, he just needed to place them in that direction, and they would automatically find their position. They would connect with each other precisely without any mistakes. At this stage, the docking coordination between the array and the environment configuration has already reached the point where it has its own rules. It doesn't exceed the rules. The dead and the living, the tangible and intangible. They can actually be fused to this degree. On the other hand, the Inferno Tyrant was able to forcefully tear a large hole in this highly fused and coordinated virtual fort. Just how powerful was the Inferno Tyrant when it was at its peak? TSK. How did it get to the top again? Luonin shook his head and sent the debugging results back. He received the approval of Xianzhu and Goyi. At the same time, a new mission was sent over. Install a frozen life transfer and maintenance module on Weiji 06. Frozen life? Luonan didn't understand what frozen life meant, so he searched for information. At this moment, Liang Lu, who was next to him, took in a breath of cold air first. Yes, the transport of the critically ill is done here. The fissure tunnel had been forcefully torn open under extremely unexpected circumstances. It was admittedly a shortcut that led directly to the interior of the relay station base, but it wasn't on the planned route. Naturally, there was a special shortcut for transporting the wounded. Well, this wasn't the first time. Meng Fan and the other frontline troops were stationed here, and more details of the situation were transmitted back. According to the current understanding of the situation, a portion of the front lines had collapsed due to the sudden appearance and attack of the Inferno Tyrant. The minions of the magnetic mica jellyfish took advantage of the situation to press forward. They took advantage of the distortion and damage of the space-time barrier to break into the core region of the front lines. Sir Shi Yuan, who was commanding the front lines, reacted quickly and decisively. He used the configuration design of the front lines and the support of the standard array to forcefully push his cultivation to the level of a senior monarch in a short amount of time. He resisted the wanton slaughter of the Inferno Tyrant and waited for the enemy's strength to decline. Of course, this had enormous repercussions. Aside from the effects Sir Shi Yuan himself had suffered, the front lines were also affected by the aftermath of the confrontation between the strong, forming a state of chaos. Anything could happen in chaos. Chapter 926. Weiji 06 was located at the edge of the original infrastructure module of the blocking position fortress. It was a special passageway for entry and exit, similar to the role of a city gate. However, it was impossible to pass through medium and large-sized vehicles, so the transfer of the freezing device became inevitable. Under the special rules and environment, all orderly and precise work would obtain considerable bonuses. The difficulty of simply installing the module was not high, and the progress was extremely fast. Plus, there were 2 senior maintenance personnel with the most experience in the blocking position. They were remotely commanding and guiding, so Luo Nan and the others could calmly discuss the technology of the freezing device and the corresponding gossip. Is it a device similar to time freezing? How can it be that exaggerated? It's just an instant freezing into a state of imminent danger. Plus, it's impossible to use it without a certain foundation and prerequisites that are extremely expensive. Liang Lu's family background was decent. For him to say something like, extremely expensive, the price of the so-called prerequisites could be imagined. Luo Nen went, oh, he didn't care about the price and the like. He just used the transfer and maintenance module blueprints to try to deduce the appearance of the freezing device. It felt like a space-time configuration design. It was quite rare these days. Concentrate, adjust the parameters, and test it again. You need to have the right attitude when dealing with these heavily injured people. Officer Xianzhu's mouth always tasted weird. He was remotely commanding through the temporary group channel, but it was practically useless. Instead, he wasted a relatively ideal surgical window. He could only continue to be a cripple. He was vexed right now, and it seemed like he was looking for trouble. After lecturing Luo Nan and Liang Lu, he turned to complain to the other side. There are hundreds of transport routes, and they chose the worst one. Passing through from this side, they can't at least guarantee the consistency of the rules and environment, including the forward position. Is there any place with more chaotic rules and environment than this fissure tunnel inside and outside of the relay base? It's like a wildfire on the side of the road. How can there be an opportunity to choose calmly on the battlefield? The other person sent to supervise and control was Lieutenant Go Yi. He no longer bickered with Xianzhu in the temporary group channel. He just discussed the matter as it stood. Rescuing and transporting the heavily injured is never easy. Due to the awkward location, there is no way to pass through the chaotic battlefield and enter the shortcut. It is possible to transfer through a fissure. No matter what, this was an extremely important mission. Otherwise, Field Officer Meng Fan would not have specifically ordered Go Yi and Xianzhu to supervise the work after sending out the maintenance soldiers. At the same time, inside Weiji 06, there was a platoon of combat soldiers on standby. It was said that they were there to provide support in the event of an unexpected situation. The stance, if I didn't know better, I would have thought that it was Kaf. Lieutenant Go Yi promptly interrupted Xian Zhu's unspoken words and forcefully shifted the focus back to the technical aspect. The replacement transport vehicle will enter the transfer channel in 20 seconds and dock with the temporary module for debugging. From the preset data, there shouldn't be any problems. Right now, the variable is the transport vehicle that drove out from the battlefield. Oh, the person in charge of the transport is someone I know. Who is it? Lieutenant Shangmin her? She's reliable. This was the first time Luo Nan saw Xian Zhu express her trust in someone so resolutely and decisively. Goya's attitude was more or less the same. Lieutenant Shang's technical level is obviously trustworthy, but we need to communicate in time to determine the details of the rules and environment. Do you want to do it, or do I? Xian Zhu responded snappily. You guys are all lieutenants. Why should I join the fun? Goyi laughed. If it weren't for the fact that your brain isn't working, it would be best to have you go over and coordinate. Xian Zhu said resentfully. Should I go and let her step on me? It's necessary to provide support and coordinate from the front. An unfamiliar voice abruptly cut into the temporary group channel. Holy crap! Xian Zhu clearly jumped in fright. Right now, the identity of the speaker naturally appeared in the channel. He was labeled Yin Xian, and his rank was that of a lieutenant. He was also the person in charge of the internal standby combat squad of Weiji 06. For a lieutenant to be in charge of a 10-man combat squad meant that he had either committed a crime or he had a high position but a low assignment. The squad under him was a first-class elite. Yin Xian's situation belonged to the latter. Goyi was very polite to Yin Xian. Lieutenant Yin, you mean? Yin Xian was also very straightforward. Swap vehicles. They've already begun to station in, but the battlefield transport vehicle has yet to enter the tunnel. I've already contacted Shangmin. She admits that she's been affected by the battlefield and that the vehicle is faulty. I suggest that our squad go forward to provide support. Lieutenant Go, you guys send a maintenance soldier to move with us. Enter the front lines of the battlefield, if necessary. Goyi was silent for half a second before saying, Okay. Luo Nan and Liang Lu, who didn't have the right to speak on the installation point, looked at each other. Luo Nan was fine, but Liang Lu's breathing was a bit rushed. The color of his emotions was probably a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Sending a maintenance soldier. From the looks of it, there was a high probability that one of the two would be chosen. And this mission was fundamentally different from any other maintenance or patrol mission from before. Only, Liang Lu's state of mind was still in a tumultuous upheaval. Xian Zhu had already called out names a step ahead of the two superiors. Luo Nin can go. He's an installation personnel. He has a plan of mind, and he's pretty good at playing with the syncopator. Go over early to make some adjustments. This will save time. Liang Lu was stunned. He didn't even know if he was disappointed or relaxed when Go Yi approved of it. Luo Nin can go. It was still Xian Zhu. He immediately said, Luo Nan can go, but he needs to swear a deadly oath first. Don't suddenly have a brain spasm and slice at the wildfire on the side of the road. Luo Nan could roughly understand that this was Xian Zhu's type of exhortation and warning, but he didn't know how to respond for a time. As a superior, Go Yi didn't pay attention to Xian Zhu's words. After a breath's worth of time passed, Go Yi suddenly spoke out of the blue. The news just came. Heiner is gone. Zoom isn't doing too well either. Xian Zhu didn't say anything, but Liang Lu, who was next to Luo Nan, said, Petty Officer Heiner. Luo Nan had a bit of an impression. Heiner and Zoom were both members of the full maintenance unit. They were also veteran maintenance officers. They had been dispatched to the front lines to do wartime maintenance early on. Luo Nan had never met them before. It wasn't to the extent of being sad. But these two familiar yet unfamiliar names suddenly weaved together into an ominous tune. It was more realistic than any warning on the eve of a mission. Only the sound of the voice could be heard in the channel, but no one could be seen. Goya's tone was flat, and he brushed this off. He only said to Yin Xian, were already on our side. Literature building. Chapter 9:27. From beginning to end, the two officers didn't seek Luo Nan's opinion. Luo Nan was a soldier who had to obey orders at this time, even if he was a rookie recruit. Luo Nan didn't raise any opinions. He couldn't even confirm whether or not this was another mission arranged by the inter-universe simulator's primal chaos mechanism. Aside from Liang Lu beside him, there was no one else to send him off. In reality, Liang Lu's mood was at a low ebb right now. It was probably a psychological battle between being chosen and not chosen, between trust and danger. Luo Nan didn't investigate in detail. A new trial had arrived. He needed to adjust the state of his body and mind. Unfortunately, his state wasn't particularly good. You need to be cautious, and you need to be obedient. Liang Lu pulled himself together with great difficulty. He used the most precise words he could to impart his not-so-rich experience. Of course, you need to be confident. The lieutenant and the sergeant both chose you. This proves that you're the most suitable. The syncopator must be used according to the drill manual. Luo Nan nodded silently. He flexed and extended his fingers, slowly adjusting his breathing. It was also at this stage that a message popped up in the virtual vision of his left eye. He was pulled into a group channel called Mobile Squad 9. That Lieutenant Yen Xian was also in it, and he immediately gave him instructions. In 3 seconds, we'll meet up with you at Wage06 launch exit number 2. From now until we depart, you have 6 seconds to adjust the group array to the standard sub 3 type. This will realize the docking of the squad. If you can't do it, speak up as soon as possible and switch people. Even for Luo Nan, Heaven Abyss's second unit had to be multiplied by 5 in order to conform to his perception of time. But when he heard the restriction of 3, 6, and the like, it made him feel pressure from the bottom of his heart. Luckily, Luo Nan was at launch exit number 2 right now. He didn't care about anything else. He closed his eyes, and the auxiliary AI brought up the standard sub 3 type group array that Lieutenant Yen Xian spoke of. Actually, this was a secondary variant of the standard battle array. It existed as a special tactical branch in a large-scale war. This was also the special characteristic of the Heaven Abyss Empire's military. The Dynamo Core was the driving force, and the overall framework of the combat force was designed. This was the foundation of all tactics and strategies. All other combat equipment existed as extensions and mounting modules of this framework. Luo Nan was already in the most universal standard array, together with a large collective of over 70 people. The formation of the blocking position and some of the nodes of the space-time barrier in the damaged H-077 infrastructure module had achieved basic integration and interaction. It was as if rivers, sand, fish, and shrimp had converged into a large lake with a relatively complete ecology. What he needed to do now was to temporarily draw a tributary with a clear direction in the middle of the vague big lake and make a detour outside. He closed his eyes and followed the description in the military drill manual. His body, spirit, chi, and the external, vertical collar dynamo core fully interacted, entering a stable and relatively lively state. The group channel of Mobile Squad 9 opened up its exclusive array interface to Luo Nan. Luo Nan imagined himself to be a lump of plasticine that was stuffed into the opening of a door lock. He combined it with the configuration design of the standard sub 3 to carry out the fine-tuning of the adaptability. A low cry rang out, accompanied by whistling air currents and Liang Lu's curses. Luo Nan opened his eyes and saw a light vehicle similar to a jeep sweep past his nose. It immediately came to a stop. Aside from the driver, there were 3 other people sitting on the vehicle, 2 on the left and 1 on the right. The empty seat was clearly for him. There was another vehicle of the same type a bit further behind. There were only 3 people, including the driver. There were also 3 individual heavy armors that were over 5 meters tall. The entire group of 10 was already present. Luo Nan didn't know who Lieutenant Yen Xian was. Luo Nan didn't ask. He didn't say much either. He glanced at Liang Lu once more before stepping over to sit in that seat. Everyone in the vehicle was already fully armed right now. The exoskeleton metal visor covered their line of sight and expressions. They all looked ice cold. Whether it was here or in the group channel, they didn't have any intention of communicating. This really wasn't too friendly. Luo then had a direct feeling of being rejected, but he was more familiar with the plane of configuration. It was like the head of a hammer smashing down the last segment the moment he stepped onto the light vehicle. There was a slight clicking sound, and the vehicle had already completed its transformation into the standard sub-3 type group formation. It connected with the few people on the vehicle and the soldiers behind them who were similarly maintaining silence. It was a seamless fit. Luonin didn't look at the time. In any case, he was certain that he hadn't run out of time. He just puffed out his chest and said, "Maintenance Soldier Luo Nan reporting for duty." Liang Lu clenched his fist to show his appreciation from below the vehicle. The person sitting across from Luo Nan finally spoke with a droning voice. "That's enough. Let's go." Clearly, he was Yin Xian, the commander of Luo Nan's current platoon. The vehicle and the heavy armor started up once more according to the order. They ascended to exit number 2 in succession and were launched out through a special opening and closing passageway. Luo Nan didn't have the time to buffer himself before he arrived in the true outside. He was driving through a long and narrow tunnel that was like a valley. The frontline battlefield was 300 meters away. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not he should be nervous right now. Lieutenant Yan Xian across from him spoke to him through the group channel without the slightest concealment. "You're a temporary member. We don't have any hopes, nor do we have the extravagant hope of having any tacit understanding. It's fine as long as we ensure that our respective missions are completed. What you need to do is to allow the transport vehicle to maintain the foundation of power to reach the blocking position. You also need to ensure that no accidents occur with the equipment during the entire transfer of the freezing device. As for your safety, we are responsible for it. You are ranked 3rd behind the freezing target and Lieutenant Shang Min, who is responsible for maintaining the freezing device. You can maintain contact through the group channel and receive technical guidance from Lieutenant Go Yi and the others. However, you must unconditionally obey the command sequence and arrangements of this platoon when it comes to the specific execution of tactics." Luo Nan didn't have much to say. He just nodded in agreement. Truthfully speaking, it didn't matter who it was ever since he entered the game setting. Whenever someone spoke to him for the first time, they would always talk about his identity as a recruit, even if they didn't have any evil intentions. Yin Xian's style of discussing matters as they were and doing things according to the official procedures really did give him a good impression. He swept his eyes over the group channel and saw the clear indication of the command sequence number. The general meaning of this was Yin Xian had an assistant when he died. If the assistant died, there would be a 3rd, 4th, 5th, and so on. Of course, there was an even stricter long-range command system above this. The current superior commander of this platoon was Lieutenant Colonel Meng Fan of the blocking position, but there would likely be new changes once they entered the frontline battlefield. Luo Nan's thoughts spun as the transport vehicle had already charged nearly 100 meters forward. Its speed was far too fast, so much so that the warning sound was a notch behind. Entering the abnormal rule area, Luo Nan discovered that the light that entered his eyes became exceptionally dazzling even through the metal visor. The light flickered indefinitely, causing him to feel a bit impatient. The Literature Building. Chapter 928. The Remnants of the Domain Laws of the Hellfire Tyrant. Luo Nan was not shocked. Instead, he was happy. Luo Nan wasn't particularly familiar with things like rules and domains, but he wasn't unfamiliar with them either. He was at the level of, "I know, I've experienced it, I have a general understanding of it, but I'm unable to give a lecture." If fighting with extraordinaries and wandering through the misty labyrinth could be considered as experiences on Earth. Regardless, Luo Nan was very interested in these things. He knew that grasping the domain laws and skillfully using them was the threshold he needed to cross in order to raise the level of his configuration ability to the next level. What's more, the stimulation these things gave him was so obvious in the game scene. Moreover, it wasn't just stimulation for Luo Nan himself. When Luo Nan and the members of Mobile Squad 9 quickly passed through this fiery zone, The flow of energy within a unified configuration frame formed by the labyrinth division formation was clearly affected by the dazzling light and the corresponding high temperature. Under the automatic adjustment of the dynamo core unit, the squad members, the equipped exoskeletons, the vehicles, and the heavy assault armor all made corresponding micro-adjustments. The machinery bore more pressure, consumed more energy, and weakened the powerful heat radiation of the outside world. At the same time, the relevant personnel needed to ensure the work efficiency of the internalized or mounted dynamo core. They had to cooperate in the frame state of their body and soul. This was only on the material plane. What Luo Nan saw on the configuration plane was much more complicated, but it was also much more straightforward. Luo Nan suppressed the urge to chop it. He used a method that was not out of line to observe seriously. But the problem was that the order was just that. On the level of details, no matter how seriously he looked or how much effort he put in, he could not see it particularly clearly. Luo Nin had guessed that it might be due to the limitations of his mental sensing mode when he was far away. But right now, he was riding a light vehicle that simply ran over the fiery zone. The standard battle formation was in direct conflict with the remnant laws of the Hellfire Tyrant. What he could see was still limited. This was by no means the interference of the dazzling light. What truly troubled him was the feeling of fuzziness after the dazzling light. It was like a mosaic patch caused by the low resolution. In short, the picture was blurred. What was going on? Was it the natural influence of the domain laws of the Hellfire Tyrant, or was it the limitation of his observation ability? Or was it a problem with the inner universe simulator? Luo Nan had faintly captured a link that he had overlooked before, but he didn't have the time to do further analysis before the 300-meter canyon formed on the Digiro 77 infrastructure module flashed past. Just when Luo Nan believed that his squad would directly charge out of the fissure tunnel, the light vehicle suddenly came to a stop. At the same time, Lieutenant Yen Xian issued a tactical order in the squad channel. All the personnel on the light vehicle got off the vehicle. They surrounded the two heavy assault armors and carried out a new deployment. At this moment, the information in the group channel increased rapidly, but it was not chaotic. Luo Nan was currently the highest level of protected personnel. He didn't have any additional missions. The others all received specific instructions in the group channel and dispersed to carry them out one after another. Luo 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 Nan. Luo Nan. Luo Luo. Luo Nan looked around and looked. Nan's Luo. Luo Nan was free for a time. He turned his head to look in all directions, sizing up the surrounding environment. He was a bit surprised. This was because the scene didn't suddenly become clear and bright after he arrived at the end of the fissure tunnel. Instead, the interior of the tunnel maintained a certain continuity. The end of the flaming canyon could not be seen in front of him. However, the material was no longer the special material piled up from the corpses of the plate-building insect. Instead, it was the natural rock stratum of Vanguard Planet Number 4. Right now, the ground Luo Nan was standing on was still part of the Bio 077 infrastructure module. The temperature was quite high, but it was still within a controllable range. However, the influence of the defense configuration of the base's space-time barrier began to weaken by a large margin. The dazzling flames of the Hellfire Tyrant wreaked more and more havoc. Not only was his line of sight severely obstructed, the ground and the rock stratum on both sides seemed to be warping and melting under the high temperature. There were even some magma-like, viscous streams of fire flowing through the cracks in the precipitous walls. At first glance, it looked a bit like the Blood Soul Temple. Correspondingly, explosions, blasts, air waves, fragments, and other battlefield elements had already begun to reveal a greater sense of existence. From time to time, there would be flying devices and flying alien life forms sweeping across the sky above the canyon. Of course, there were large amounts of burning earth and rock that continued to collapse from the flaming canyon. It made one suspect that if they continued forward, they would be buried alive without the need for the enemy to make a move. However, Luo Nan was still able to see the soldiers of Mobile Squad 9 advance into the endlessly collapsing depths of the flaming canyon without the slightest hesitation after receiving orders, even though they were only in exoskeleton light armor. They carried out tactical vigilance and exploration. The soldiers who charged forward did indeed have the support of the standard array. A thin layer of light film appeared on their bodies under the roasting of the dazzling flames, giving them protection. But soon, the figures of these people were engulfed by the flames. Even though the various data representing their states were still normal in the group channel, the visual effect was enough to make one tremble with fear. According to Luo Nan's rough judgment, the lethality of these dazzling flames was roughly equivalent to that of the mush-mouth ape. Their forms were quite similar as well. They attacked the material and mental planes at the same time. Their current explosiveness was a bit lacking, but they far surpassed in terms of endurance and penetrative nature. In other words, these were all B+ rank lethality by Earth standards. But the soldiers who charged forward, all the members of Mobile Squad 9, were at the sergeant rank. They went in when they said they would, without the slightest hesitation. Most importantly, they had indeed realized the ability to survive and maneuver in this extremely vile environment. As for their cultivations, it was really hard to estimate using Earth standards. According to Luo Nan's estimations, the individual combat strength of the relay station's officers and soldiers was compared to Earth's. Ignoring the special circumstances of the mental side and the special characteristics of some soldier types, the sergeant rank was already in between the awakened and the architect rank. In other words, it was on the level between C and B rank. If one were to include the bonus equipment, then they would probably have a B rank fleshly body. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to compare them to the upgraded versions of the Deep Blue Walkers of Quanta Corporation and the Apocalypse Laboratory. Their individual combat strength was already at the level of the architect rank. It was just the difference between B and B+. There are also a few examples. For example, Lu Andy, who was a veteran of 100 battles. Luo Nan found it hard to estimate what kind of combat strength he could display after being equipped with equipment. As for the illustrious nobles, it was said that there would be a bit of a difference in rank and strength, but it wasn't too much of a problem to view them as extraordinary. In this way, there were over 10,000 people in the relay station's defense force. 1 out of 10 sergeants, 1 out of 100 lieutenants, and 12 illustrious nobles. Aside from the fact that the number of extraordinaries was a bit lacking, this single unit was enough to completely crush Earthside in other aspects. But Luo Nan still had to say that this wasn't the way to look at strength. Purely comparing individual combat strength was completely meaningless. What about weapons and equipment that were countless generations apart? What about the systematization of cultivation? What about the most direct, standard arrays that could be formed by 2 people, 3 to 5 people, 10 to 100 people, and even 1,000 to 10,000 people? Luo Nan had crossed paths with Deep Blue Walkers many times on the plane of reality. He had always been researching burners, the archetype format, the Deep Blue platform, the Apocalypse Laboratory, and other targets. He was fully aware that a single Deep Blue Walker wasn't scary, but a group of 8 or 10 Deep Blue Walkers working together to open up a formatted space absolutely couldn't be underestimated. But compared to the Heavenly Yuan Empire's standard array, the coordinated attack system was much more powerful than the Heavenly Yuan Empire's standard array. Apart from the fact that it was much more powerful on the mental level, there were also differences in every aspect and every detail. The most important point was that even though the number of burners on Earth had rapidly expanded during this period of time, there were at most 1 or 2,000 of them. There were even fewer who could reach the evaluation of B rank. But there were practically no exceptions among the thousands of sergeants at the relay station, at least in the battle order. Their combat strength was indeed powerful to the point of inconceivably powerful. But on this basis, what level was the combat strength of the great sovereign-level fantasy breed and his servant army that formed an all-out siege against the relay station? Needless to say, on an even broader plane, In the endless era of movement that spanned hundreds and thousands of years, super powerful beings like Lord Janha, great sovereign Chang Yishuan, and the gods of the heavens simply exceeded the scope of his rational imagination and construction. Luo Nan stood at the edge of the fissure tunnel at this moment. He faced the dazzling light and raging flames that assaulted his face. The standards of extraordinary power that he had gradually established on Earth began to melt and collapse. At the same time, a tender sprout of curiosity and thirst for knowledge was frantically absorbing nutrients within the shattered ruins. It grew rapidly, so much so that some of his thoughts, which had gradually subdued in the collective environment of strict military rules, began to stir once more. They popped, and it was at this time that Lieutenant Yin Xian suddenly called out to him. Luo Nan. Yes, Lieutenant. Luo Nan thought that the operation was about to begin, but he didn't know that he had pulled Yin Xian into an impromptu chat group. Go Yi and Xian Zhu, who acted as technical instructors, were already here. There were also two other people. One was Lieutenant Shang Min, whom Luo Nan had just heard of, and the other was called Damo Lin. He was also a lieutenant. Luo Nan was the smallest of them all, but no one paid attention to these details right now. The chat group interface was spread out with a simple diagram of the current situation on the battlefield outside. It was extremely intuitive. From Luo Nan's point of view, it was like he was facing a chessboard. His perspective cut in from the parallel direction of the Chu River Han boundary. The two flanks were the battlefield of intense strangulation. The green dot of light that marked the transport vehicle could barely be considered to be the left edge of the Chu River Han boundary. It roughly crossed the position of the Zhu Lin boundary and advanced with difficulty. There were still at least 2 squares of distance before Luo Nan and the others could successfully jump out of the chessboard. Chapter 929. Luo Nan saw the map of the battlefield situation, but this didn't mean that he had to, or that he had the qualifications to think about this. The officers who had entered the conversation group long before him had more or less analyzed the situation. What Luo Nan needed to do next was just carry out the orders. Oh, due to the special nature of technical work, he needed to do some homework in advance. He needed to make some basic judgments. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't even have the chance to enter the conversation group. The Heavenly Yuan Empire was known as an empire. Under most circumstances, the hierarchy was very strict. Luckily, Go Yi, who had recommended Luo Nan to participate in this operation, took great care of him. This is the transport vehicle's structural diagram, the mounting module diagram, and the design diagram of the freezing device. Both the configuration and the machinery are present. Also, this is the current real-time self-inspection status of the transport vehicle. There is also the list of spare parts and maintenance plans that Officer Xianzhu and I have determined based on the above information. A portion of this has already been carried over by Mobile Squad 9. The rest will be delivered by the Battlefield Supply Department at a fixed point after confirmation. Luo Nan instantly received a large amount of information. He also received Lieutenant Go Ye's complex and meticulous train of thought on this matter. He was quite embarrassed by this. Compared to a veteran maintenance soldier like Go Yi, Luo Nan's train of thought was a bit too straightforward. He had come over with his head down, completely neglecting the spare parts and maintenance plans. Even if he reached the transport vehicle, would he have to use his teeth to fix it? Xianzhu also spoke. Basically, you can follow this, but you need to pay attention to the basics. In this damned place, unforeseen events can happen in the blink of an eye. Plus, some people have chosen a tactical route. Basically, they are aiming for the unexpected. Shut your mouth. We've already delayed for a quarter of an hour. Even if we delay for 10 more seconds, the entire operation will be pointless. Lieutenant Damo, who Luo Nan had never dealt with before, sounded extremely irritable. Luo Nan was even able to hear some explosive noises from deep within. Could it be that this Mr. Lieutenant was still in the middle of battle? Luo Nan couldn't get angry at such a person. Soon, a slightly raspy female voice rang out. Damo, your opinion and attitude have already been made clear. You won't change it. Then concentrate on doing what you need to do. The flank has taken another hit. TCH, The short words had yet to finish when the chat interface already displayed the words, "Shang Min has kicked Damo out of the conversation group." This big sister lieutenant was really straightforward. Luonin couldn't help but think of Go Yi and Xianzhu's trust towards this female officer. They even felt fear. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he heard the voice again. Now the inner magnetic coil on the left side of the car body is broken, and the energy storage tank is giving an alarm. What should we do? Go Yi immediately said, "You only need to. I'm asking the maintenance soldier who's about to board the train." Only now did Luo Nen realize that this big sister lieutenant officer was coming straight for him. But what could he do even if he knew? He had never come into contact with transfer vehicles before, and he had only obtained the relevant blueprints and information for a few seconds. How could he come up with a plan? Speaking of which, how many days had it been since Luo Nan was asked to the point of being tongue-tied when it came to professional knowledge? It was precisely because of this experience that he was about to forget that he became more and more useless. His face flushed red and even felt a little hot. Officer Shangmin's tone was a bit cold when she asked Luo Nan a question. Perhaps those two cripples sent you because they had more thorough considerations. But I believe that before you board the bus, the most important thing you should do is, all I have to do is make up for it. Holy crap. Luonin immediately thought of Officer Damo's fate. How could he not know what he was facing? In this instant, he wasn't thinking about begging for mercy or a reprieve. Instead, he was thinking about something that was especially important to him. It should have existed alongside the battlefield situation diagram, but it wasn't reflected in the diagram. Luo Nan's voice moved, and something popped out his mind. I want the real-time route of the transfer vehicle and the monitoring diagram of the surrounding spatial barrier configuration. Only the heavens knew whether or not the words he had hastily organized could be conveyed properly. In any case, Luo Nan had already been kicked out of the conversation before his voice faded away. The simplified map of the battlefield that he had seen in the dialogue earlier had also been wiped clean. Hey! Luo Nan let out a low cry, but it was useless. Officer Yin Xian turned his head at this time. The eyes beneath the metal helmet seemed to be observing him. Luo Nan pondered whether or not he should let this officer help pass on a message. But at this time, the Chu River Han boundary appeared in the virtual interface of Luo Nan's left eye in the form of a chessboard. The complex and changing graphical lines and numeric symbols appeared at the same time as well. Luo Nan would have been stupefied in the past, but after listening to Lieutenant Commander Sheng Zhan's lecture earlier, he already had some ability to adapt to this kind of expression. He knew that this was the real-time monitoring data of the defense state of the base's internal and external areas by Ant Kue, the highest-level AI of the relay station. Those who knew the ropes would naturally be able to obtain the necessary information. Luo Nan could barely be considered as someone who knew the ropes. Aside from this, there were even more intuitive markings on the chessboard. Two dotted lines extended out from the green dots that represented the transport vehicle. One was to advance along the edge of the Chu River Han boundary, and at the very end of the chessboard, he would enter the canyon area in the center. The other was to directly enter the canyon from where the grid was, and then go straight to the blocking position from the center. Seeing these two lines, Luo Nan immediately understood what the officers were discussing and debating about in the impromptu chat group. Of course, he also knew what the final result would be. Sure enough, the conservative route that extended along the edge of the canyon had already been erased in the time it took to breathe. All that was left was the route that forced its way through the depths of the canyon. Luo Nan naturally discarded the data of the useless region. He focused on observing the situation of the space-time barrier in the canyon region in front of him. The chaotic and changing graphical lines gave him a sense of intuition. The rapidly switching numbers were even more callous. Luo Nan wasn't sensitive enough to the latter, but he already knew that this path was absolutely not easy to walk just by looking at the former. He didn't know or care about the other dangers. What gave him the biggest headache was how to deal with the intense conflict between the space-time barrier and the laws of the Hellfire Tyrant's domain. The structural strength of the transport vehicle was a challenge. The maintenance of the transport vehicle's transportation environment was another. Luonin quickly flipped through the blueprints, doing his utmost to absorb the key points of knowledge within. His cerebral cortex faintly swelled and cracked. Right when he was racking his brains, Lieutenant Yin spoke in a deep voice. "What's your opinion?" "Me?" Luonan was startled, but he knew that he didn't have the time to hesitate. He immediately gritted his teeth and answered, "I need to do an on-the-spot survey and adapt." This definitely wasn't a good answer, but Lieutenant Yin Xian didn't have any other reaction. He just said, "Then let's go." The light vehicles in front are unable to pass. You activate the follow mode and pin down Jiegang. I'll be behind you. Jiegang was a member of Mech Class 9. Luo Nen was one of the pilots of the heavy assault armor. He glanced to the left, looking at the steel behemoth that was 3 times his height and 50 times his weight. Luo Nen had already activated the relevant interface on the Dynamo Core program. Naturally, Luo Nen had no reason to refuse. You don't need to think too much for now. Concentrate on studying the data. You need to display your usefulness in the transport vehicle. Lieutenant Yin Xian didn't say what would happen if Luo Nen didn't display his usefulness. Luo Nen didn't want to know. The auxiliary AI vibrated once more. It was Lieutenant Go Yi who sent more data. It was an extremely considerate solution to the problem of magnetic coils and energy storage tanks. Xianzhu's message followed closely behind. "Don't worry. There are quite a few field maintenance soldiers over there. We aren't crazy enough to let you shoulder the burden alone." Luo Nan's eyelids twitched. Even though Xianzhu said these things to reduce the pressure on him, Luo Nan acted as if he hadn't seen these words. Lieutenant Yin Xian didn't tarry any longer. After receiving the latest information from the scouting outpost, he issued an order in the squad channel. The entire squad advanced forward. A total of 11 people, including Luo Nan, completely submerged into the ceaselessly burning and collapsing rock canyon before them in less than half a second. Luo Nan left the basic construction module and stepped onto the natural rock layer of the planet. The ever-bright virtual interface on Luo Nan's left retina clearly dimmed by a layer. Part of it was due to the effect of the intense light, but the majority of it was due to the interference of the shattered domain laws of the Hellfire Tyrant behind the dazzling flames. This complicated and shattered law was so close to Luo Nan. If it weren't for the isolation of the exoskeleton armor and the Type S3 array, Luo Nan might have already melted inside. But even at this distance, the details of the flames were still blurred like a mosaic. How strange. Who cares? Luo Nan narrowed his eyes. He used his eyelids to isolate the piercing flames, maintaining the purity of his thoughts. At this moment, even the mysteries of the Hellfire Tyrant's domain laws had to make way for the mission he shouldered. Sergeant Jiegang drove his heavy assault armor up ahead, directly smashing through the wall of fire and the ceaselessly falling earth and rock fragments. He forcefully opened up a path forward in the depths of the already half-collapsed canyon. At the same time, he pulled Luo Nan along, maintaining relative synchronization. Lieutenant Yin Xian was endlessly adjusting the weight of each member of the squad, receiving the array's blessing. No matter how he adjusted it, Luo Nan would always be the one with the highest priority. So much so that Luo Nan's vision was completely blocked several hundred meters ahead. There were no other changes to Luo Nan's body aside from the floating dust and the elevated temperature caused by the scorching flames. Under these conditions, Luo Nan endlessly integrated the design blueprints, the transfer vehicle's real-time self-inspection results, the surrounding environment. Of course, there were also the nesting and functional relationships of the space-time barrier, the standard combat array, and other large and small configuration systems. He knew that time was of the essence. He simply gave up on the material and mechanical parts and only focused on one. Because of this, the knowledge and information he grasped didn't have a standard to refer to. All he had was the general network of thought that was established on the foundation of configuration, as well as his mind that gradually stabilized. Suddenly, an order pierced into the group channel in Luo Nan's auxiliary AI mission system at the same time. It included the corresponding authority and signal link. And the most coarse sentence was, Get in the car. Chapter 9:30. Did the transfer vehicle come down just like that? Just looking at the momentum of the landslide above their heads, it was as if they were all buried alive. Should he charge in under these circumstances? In the end, Luo Nan was not an elite who had experienced hundreds of battles on a battlefield. He instinctively analyzed the situation when he saw the collision of flint and stone and the momentum of the landslide pouring down. The problem was that he was currently in the middle of the platoon. It was simply not his turn to make a judgment. He did not move. The heavy assault armor in front of him was pulling him to move. Behind him, Lieutenant Yin Xian was forcing him to move. There was no need to shout to urge him. The configuration change of the platoon array was the clearest command. Luo Nan did not resist. He made the choice that was most in line with battlefield discipline at this time. He completed a series of adjustments with the standard movements of a drill. His entire body was like an arrow shot by an incorporeal bowstring. He followed behind the heavy assault armor and charged into the flood of flames and rubble. In this moment, Luo Nan faintly found the feeling he had when he fought with Gong Qi some time ago, especially the blazing high temperature that distorted the surrounding air and even the form of all matter. It was extremely similar to the lava cavern that was the final battlefield back then. But the current situation was not the same as back then, when he had the Pearl of Wisdom in his hands. It was far too chaotic. The whistling flood of rubble, wrapped in raging flames, continuously battered down. It was like the continuous beating of a large drum by his side. The shockwaves stirred his internal organs, rocking them back and forth. This proved that the defensive power of the platoon battle array was still in play. The heavy assault armor that opened up the path also tore through the most destructive force of the landslide's frontal assault. This gave Luo Nan the space to adjust his strength. As for the transfer vehicle that looked as if it wanted to smash all the receiving personnel to death, its enormous body, which was like a heavy truck, clearly had a reverse brake in the middle of its descent. The damage to one side of the maglev device caused the vehicle to lose balance. The rear end smashed heavily into the rock wall of the canyon, forming an even more astonishing landslide of rubble. However, it was not enough to fall straight down and lead to a tragedy of suicide. Luo Nan did not need to be reminded to know that the time had come when the transfer vehicle did its best to adjust its position in midair. But Luo Nan didn't need to put much effort into it. The virtual vision of his left eye already displayed a simulated route leading to the objective of this operation. It even marked out the specific methods and nodes of exertion. All Luo Nan needed to do was precisely execute. Actually, even if he made a mistake in his execution, Lieutenant Yin Xian, who had been following him like a shadow, would certainly be his final insurance. Luo Nan was able to clearly sense that Lieutenant Yin Xian had already chased him to a distance that was within arm's reach. Luo Nan could exert his strength from behind at any time. Rookies really don't make people feel at ease. The corner of Luo Nan's mouth cracked open behind the metal visor. His state of mind became increasingly clear. He began to silently count in his mind, using the rhythm of the Earth's countdown. 2, 1, dodge. Yin Xian, who was behind Luo Nan, suddenly changed his orders. Luo Nan, who had already begun to twist his waist to exert strength, was forcefully knocked down by the steel body charging at him from behind. And the already tall and sturdy torso of the heavy assault armor in front of Luo Nan swelled up several times in this instant. Its two arms came together with a bang, and its mechanical modules deformed to prop up a large shield of considerable surface area. It protected Luo Nan, Yin Xian, and the other two squad sergeants who had alertly pounced back. Luo Nan plunged head first into the loose yet still burning layer of rubble. He couldn't see anything, but he still maintained a connection with the transfer vehicle. So he was able to clearly sense that the transfer vehicle, which had been about to finish adjusting itself, suddenly suffered an extremely powerful artillery strike from the rear. The penetrative power and explosive power of this strike were tyrannical to the extreme. Nearly a fifth of the metal outer shell, baffles, and spare parts of the rear of the transfer vehicle were blown into smithereens. At the same time, there were at least 3 human bodies, or broken limbs and fragments. The transfer vehicle lost control in an instant. The real-time information Luo Nan received clearly showed that the vehicle's kinetic system was in disorder. The forceful braking had reduced the momentum of the vehicle's fall, but it suddenly increased explosively. The vehicle plunged down diagonally from midair, smashing into the rock layer at the other side of the canyon. The body of the heavy truck, with the momentum of the fall, dug almost 3 meters deep into the wall, but it was also crazily straightening itself. Pushed by the uncontrollable power, it was like a blunt knife that cut an extremely deep crack in the burning wall. Then, it pushed against half of the rock stratum and moved forward with a loud bang. Its direction was still toward the blocking position, but this way, it perfectly missed Luo Nan and the others, who were coming over to provide support. Luo Nan subconsciously wanted to get up when he saw this situation, but Yin Xian, who was pressing down on his shoulder, didn't say a word. He gave Luo Nan a clear downward force, stopping Luo Nan's movements. In the next instant, Luo Nan saw through the monitoring equipment of the transfer vehicle that smoke rose from all over the canyon. Some abnormal colors were cast down from above. The color was a relatively dark, yellowish-green ball of mucus. It caught fire the moment it came into contact with fire. Smoke rose everywhere, and it rapidly accumulated to a certain density before exploding with a rumble. The dazzling flames that were burning on the rock layer exploded into a rain of fire that filled the sky. This rain of fire would burn and corrode a hole in the blink of an eye as soon as it landed on something solid. Moreover, there was a second explosion. It was extremely sinister. Luo Nan's side was able to evade in time. He had the heavy assault armor blocking the outermost layer. The defensive power of the array was effectively concentrated, allowing him to avoid this disaster. It was just that the surface of the armor controlled by Jie Gang had suffered quite a bit of damage. But on the other side, the transport vehicle had already suffered heavy damage. Its defensive power was clearly lacking. After this rain of fire, it became riddled with thousands of holes. The sinister flames that had been catalyzed were impossible to extinguish as long as they burned. The flames followed along the outer armor of the vehicle body, continuing to spread and permeate. In the short span of a breath, the transport vehicle had truly become a train. It was like a raging burning ball of fire. It launched a desperate charge toward the fissure tunnel several hundred meters away. "Let's go." This time, Yin Xian forcefully pulled Luo Nan up. Then he exploded into action, reversing his direction. He charged like a hurricane on this side of the canyon in an attempt to catch up to the transport vehicle, which was wrapped in flames. Luo Nan used his own perspective to quickly survey the surroundings. He saw a series of muffled collisions. It was similar to the cannon fire that had fiercely struck the transport vehicle before. The collisions smashed into the 2 sides of the rock walls. Every collision caused smoke and dust to fill the sky. Shock waves crisscrossed back and forth, pounding people's lungs and causing their skulls to shake. Shadows streaked across the air above the canyon. There were at least a dozen or so low-flying flying vehicles and even more pterodactyl-like vicious creatures. They whistled and pierced through the air in a form of collision. Quite a few of them turned into fireballs in the first instant. Armored soldiers jumped out of the vehicles and fell to the edge of the canyon. Some even fell to the bottom of the canyon. As for the pterodactyls, they were the main culprits that had spat out the acid bombs. They suffered quite a bit of damage right now. Fortunately, they weren't able to drop a second wave of catalyzing poison that could have taken their lives. There was also an enormous beetle that was the size of a heavy tank at the edge of the canyon. It was unknown when it surged up, but it fell down like dumplings. Its enormous size was simply a devastating disaster for the already fragile canyon. It gave people the feeling that hundreds of thousands of square meters of earth and rock had collapsed in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan had seen the acid pterodactyls, the assault beetles, and the monsters that carried out the long-range bombardment during his offline testing. He had been in the game for a long time, and he understood that these were the servants of the magnetite mica jellyfish. They were terrifying monsters that were created under the dual effects of magnetization and stitching. There was also the Hellfire Tyrant that was still in a corner of the battlefield. It was extremely likely that this was the result of the third and most mysterious ability of the magnetite mica jellyfish, the Dimensional Gate. This was the might of a senior monarch-level magnetite mica jellyfish. He was thinking too far ahead. But these things before his eyes were undoubtedly attracted by the transport vehicle. The intensity of their battle had already exceeded the norm. Even with Luo Nan's relatively meager knowledge, he was able to determine that this represented the tyrannical senior monarch-level life form that occupied the clouds. It was currently casting its attention in this direction. There was no doubt that the base was mobilizing troops as well. But the space-time fortress was damaged, and the front lines were in a state of chaos. The response was inevitably a beat slower. Right now, the natural rock layer region of the Blazing Canyon was close to the Bio 077 module. It was on the verge of collapse. Not only were the flames of the canyon not extinguished under the surging flood of earth and rock, but they exploded once more. Though they didn't turn into a rain of fire, the impact force was still extremely tyrannical. Luo Nan, who had already turned back at high speed, felt high-temperature flames pounce on his back. His exoskeleton armor was about to melt. At this time, metal clanged. The heavy assault armor that Jie Gang piloted was like a sturdy wall. It forcefully inserted itself between the gushing flames and the retreating Luo Nan and the others, isolating them from the high temperature and the shock wave. On the other side, the other heavy assault armor did the same. It protected the other light armor infantry of the squad, blocking at least a portion of the attack. In an instant, then, this temporarily formed defensive array was wrapped up by the dazzling flames and shockwave of the explosion. It was on the verge of collapse. And after the impact of the raging flames, an even more deadly and vicious enemy was about to attack. Luo Nen couldn't pay attention to the surging heat wave behind him. He just stared fixedly at the transport vehicle in front of him that was already beyond recognition. The maintenance plan that Go Yi and Xianzhu had prepared in advance had long since become a pile of meaningless symbols under these circumstances. Most of the information that Luo Nan had forcefully stuffed into his brain was about to be turned to ash along with the flames wrapping around the vehicle. Yen Xian was still leading Luo Nan in pursuit, but he didn't have any effective orders. It was easy to imagine that the impromptu conversation group he was in certainly didn't have any clear plans. In fact, under these circumstances, it was unknown whether or not the freezing device, which had harsh requirements for maintaining the environment, would still be working normally. No, it was still working. Luo Nan's breathing grew more and more hurried as he madly sprinted to his limits. At this moment, his brain was constantly refreshing the real-time monitoring data of the transport vehicle, even though it was becoming more and more incomplete, more and more blurry and chaotic. Speaking of which, this wasn't much from Luo Nan's perspective. He wasn't an expert when it came to the mechanical structure of the vehicle. His true domain of superiority lay in the level of configuration that was above the material substance. In Luo Nan's eyes, the core configuration of the current transport vehicle was extraordinarily complete. Perhaps this description needed to be extended to an even broader domain. Chapter 9:31. Luo Nan's consciousness grew all the more lively under this pressing situation. He tried to polish the judgment in his heart a bit more clearly to inform Yen Xian, Go Yi, and the other superiors. But before he could form words, the transfer vehicle in front of him, the transfer vehicle that Luo Nan had determined to have a complete core configuration, loudly disintegrated from the intense collision and friction that continued for several hundred meters. The transfer vehicle even formed a muffled explosion the instant it disintegrated. The bursting wave of air blew the fragmented body of the vehicle out from the rock wall it had cut into. The outer shell of the vehicle split into pieces, and the parts and fragments filled the sky. There were even human figures bursting out from within the vehicle. Luo Nan's eyelids twitched violently behind the metal visor. He also felt some fluctuations in the mind of Lieutenant Yin Xian beside him. The frequency at which Lieutenant Yin Xian's head swayed left and right clearly increased. It was clear that Lieutenant Yin Xian was intimidated by the situation before his eyes and was somewhat distracted. Of course, Luo Nen was affected as well. The situation he saw with his own eyes and his deeper perceptual judgment formed a solid collision. But soon, his brain won over his eyes. His mouth was a step ahead as he gasped for breath and hissed. "There's no problem with the freezing device." Lieutenant Yin Xian tilted his head to the side. Then he gave an unexpected answer. "Yes, there's no problem." Huh. Luo Nan's psychological analysis of Lieutenant Yin Xian was clearly wrong, but his most crucial judgment hit the bull's eye. After the aftermath of the explosion dissipated, the situation became increasingly clear. It was true that the transfer vehicle had exploded, but its core, the cabin that carried the freezing device, was still basically intact. At most, it was a bit blackened by the smoke and fire. Instead, it seized the opportunity to break free from the insidious flames catalyzed by the pterosaur's acid bomb. It also broke free from the negative effects of the vehicle's completely out of control. It relied on its own miniature power pump to continue advancing towards the blocking position in a maglev state. Though its speed was 2 levels slower, it was much steadier than before. As for the human figures bursting out from the explosion, they had clearly taken the initiative to break free. 7 or 8 of them were either calm or in a sorry state, but they all landed safely on the ground. They just so happened to rendezvous with Mobile Squad 9, which had been pushed over by the surging heat wave. The battle formations of both sides instantly adjusted to their positions, harmonizing as one. And then, everyone continued running with large strides. There was nothing he could do about it. Even though the previous round of destructive collapses and explosions formed surging waves of heat that began to rapidly weaken with the passage of time and distance, ominous noises continued to enter Luo Nan's ears one after another. It was a kind of screeching sound of friction. It was the omen of a tyrannical assault beetle breaking through the smoke and flames to quickly approach. At this moment, the enemy's pterosaur forces in the air began to be suppressed by the superior firepower of the base. The distant artillery also temporarily stopped firing. However, these assault beetles that had broken through the layers of defense and were pressing forward were still troublesome and powerful enemies. Luo Nen had once specially researched the information on these toys. He knew that their bodies were enormous, like light tanks. Every one of them was about the size of a heavy assault armor, and they possessed boundless strength. Their limbs were sharp, their speed was extremely fast, and their close combat might was astonishing. Perhaps its outer shell was a little weak, but once it was heavily injured, its entire body would burn on its own. Its explosive power and lethality would increase dramatically, allowing it to launch a deadly assault on its target. It could be said that once these guys got close, the members of Mobile Squad 9, who were equipped with light armor, and the escort personnel who jumped down from the transport vehicle, would at most end up exchanging a life for a life. Everyone knew how powerful these things were, so the best way to deal with them was to seize the opportunity when the enemy's air power was being suppressed at this stage. This was to create the most reasonable combat distance and tempo for long-range combat. However, a more realistic problem was quickly placed before them. In front, the frozen living cabin, which had shaken off the transport vehicle's outer shell, had already degraded its own power. Its speed had already dropped to around 50 kilometers per hour, and it was advancing less than 15 meters per second. And it was still nearly a kilometer away from the assault position. The group channel, which had been silent for a long time, finally refreshed with new orders. In this instant, the officers of Mobile Squad 9 practically flipped their bodies at the same time, forming a retreating, defending, and attacking formation. The escort personnel of the transport vehicle were just a bit late, but they also made corresponding changes. Aside from Luo Nan and Yin Xian, everyone else clearly slowed down in the span of a breath or two. As for those assault beetles, their entire bodies had already been set aflame just as they emerged from the dazzling flames. They entered a berserk state, and their speed continued to soar. The distance between the two sides had been erased by more than half with one drop, and the ones at the very back had already begun to exchange fire with the enemy. Even though Luo Nan was a rookie on the battlefield, he knew that this absolutely wasn't the best tactical choice. Casualties appeared in practically the first instant. Luo Nan could only watch helplessly as a certain code name dimmed down in the group channel. Before he could react, another code name appeared. Strictly speaking, Luo Nan didn't know the people of Mobile Squad 9. They were separated by a visor when they met. Even if Luo Nan changed places and changed attire, Luo Nan wouldn't be able to recognize him. It was just that the innate emotional mechanism of humans displayed its effect at this moment. This change was like a whip that directly lashed at the top of Luo Nan's head, causing his entire cerebral cortex to twitch. "I'll go speed up," Luo Nan blurted out. Protection is the #1 priority. Lieutenant Yin Xian's voice was so calm that it didn't seem like a real person's. Luo Nan didn't argue with him. It was also at this moment that the plan in his mind suddenly became clear. He began to output into the temporary channel connected to Go Yi and Xianzhu. He adjusted and selected the tools and spare parts he needed. The two officers had previously designated a large portion of the items. Luo Nan didn't request for additional items. He needed to save time. There were no arguments in the channel either. The two officers, who were also the seniors of the maintenance soldiers, chose to let the frontline maintenance soldiers follow their own train of thought at this critical moment. This was also to save time. Confirm. Fire. The spare parts Luo Nan requested were fired from the location of the assault array through guidance technology. They were thrown to the place they had to pass through in order to receive them. But what arrived first were 3 blazing flashes of light. They practically streaked across everyone's scalps. They exploded a few meters behind Luo Nan. To be more precise, they exploded in the line of fire formed by the assault personnel behind him. The assault position, fortress, was the artillery support. The number of assault beetles that were blown over was secondary. What was important was that it formed an even larger landslide. It completely blocked off the path to Flaming Canyon behind the line of fire. The offensive of the vicious assault beetles had suffered a setback, but it was only a setback. The magnetic mica jellyfish of the senior monarch level had certainly set Flaming Canyon as an extremely high priority. The servant army of the frontline battlefield poured in regardless of the cost. These stitched freaks, who had no concept of fear and death, displayed a crazy drive to blast open the defensive barrier of time and space. They used the explosions of their own kind as their main attack, and they used their sharp limbs to dig as support. In the blink of an eye and a breath of time, the collapsed canyon passage was forcefully pierced through by the swarm of assault beetles. This kind of investment seemed to be enough to carry out a few waves of assaults against the assault position ahead. In fact, the assault position had already entered a state of war. They had begun to execute the assault mission. Luo Nan divided a portion of his mind to pay attention to the battle situation, but his thoughts were not chaotic. Instead, his thoughts became clearer and clearer. The spare parts and toolboxes were already in place ahead. To the side, the outer cabin of the maglev propulsion frozen alive installation was already a short distance behind them. It was even easier to calculate ahead of time. He could faintly feel Lieutenant Yin Xian's gaze turn over. This was a critical juncture where he needed to make a move. If Luo Nan did not react in time, Yin Xian would do the same as before and make the decision for him. This time, there was really no need. Luo Nan exhaled and inhaled from behind his visor. He sent out a message in the group channel, "Prepare to dock." This time, he did not count down. He directly exerted force after the preparatory work was completed. The exoskeleton armor that covered his entire body gave him an even greater restraint. Actually, the expansion and contraction of the muscles of his entire body formed an even more explosive force that propelled him to the side and forward. In the end, Luo Nan was not a true rookie recruit. Even though he had never experienced a battlefield like this, he had crossed swords with all sorts of people on Earth. This experience was enough to temper his judgment and action power at critical junctures. In this moment, the state of the outer cabin of the Frozen Alive installation, the state of the squad, the state of the spare parts box ahead, and his own state all appeared in his mind in a configuration mode that was detached from the substance. The configuration mode continuously refreshed and changed. Whether it was calculation, prediction, or intuition, there was nothing wrong with Luo Nan's ejection trajectory, and the forward path of the outer cabin of the Frozen Alive installation converged in an instant 20 meters ahead of him. It was at the midline of the canyon, and there was precisely the location of the spare parts box that had been launched over. Luonin took the first step and unlocked the privileges of the spare parts box through the air. He controlled this box made of special materials and placed it flat on the flame-covered ground. Luo Nan, who was suspended in midair, waited for a moment in this position. The belated outer cabin of the Frozen Alive installation passed through the top of the spare parts box and collided head-on. A muffled sound rang out as the spare parts box accurately adhered to the bottom of the outer cabin of the Frozen Alive installation. At the same time, a data link was realized. As for Luo Nan, he had already obtained the relevant privileges earlier. Right now, he displayed his usefulness. The outer cabin of the Frozen Alive installation, which was completely in the state of a lump of iron, opened a door in front of it. Luo Nan shrunk his body and rolled, smashing his body inside. Luo Nan's ears buzzed and vibrated in this moment. Then he collided with a layer of nothingness, an air buffer membrane. He spun a dozen times in this not-so-spacious area, and the powerful momentum was digested. It was just that Luo Nan couldn't control his body's balance too firmly for the sake of ensuring the relative stability of his brain and lungs. The air buffer membrane disappeared, and his shoulders and hips smashed onto the floor of the carriage with a bang. Luo Nan didn't have any other reactions aside from gasping for breath. At most, he took the opportunity to test the state of the spare parts box through the floor. Then he propped himself up and looked out the only side window. He saw Lieutenant Yin Xian's figure shoot back at high speed from outside. Clearly, he had already returned to the front lines of battle. Luo Nan's gaze turned back. It was unavoidable that his gaze was attracted by the translucent, Frozen Alive installation at the center of the cabin. The person inside that had entered a Frozen Alive state seemed familiar. Whether it was the tall and astonishing torso, or the malevolent metal prosthesis that blended with flesh and blood on its cheeks, it gave off an extremely deep impression. Luo Nan had seen this person 2 days ago. That's right. This was one of the high-ranking officers of the relay station, the commander of the elite mobility force, Sir Shi Yuan. Hold on. If this person was here, then who was the one resisting the Hellfire Tyrant on the front lines? Chapter 932. Luo Nan was slightly startled. A good problem appeared before his eyes. It was worth researching, but he didn't take it a step further. His energy really didn't allow him to. Instead of thinking about these things, he might as well take the opportunity to catch a few breaths and slow down his sluggish and weak state. Phew, what a freak. Luo Nan did his best to calm his breathing. He felt the repeated process of sweat overflowing his skin and being sucked dry by the combat uniform. His mouth mumbled some meaningless words. His state hadn't been good since he arrived at the battlefield today. He was tired, dizzy, irritated. His physical strength consumption had increased quite a bit compared to normal. Luo Nan guessed that it was either because he didn't have the experience of long-term service in the medium to large standard arrays, or because he didn't have enough skills in carrying heavy loads. Or maybe the chaotic rules and environment outside gave him, a sensitive outsider, too much interference. But in any case, physical strength was absolutely not an excuse for not doing a good job. He exerted himself to gasp for a few breaths. He half-knelt on the cabin board and used the preset control panel to remotely control the spare parts container that was only separated by a board. He inspected the modules and spare parts inside and made a preliminary classification in his mind. In a certain sense, the spare parts container was equivalent to a miniature munitions factory for a qualified maintenance soldier. Luo Nan, who had just started his career as a maintenance soldier, could still be considered a qualified maintenance soldier. There was still room for discussion. But his mind really did store a sizable design blueprint and a configuration framework with even more guiding significance. After a few hurried breaths, the inspection was completed and his train of thought became clear once more. Luo then began to knock on the cabin board. He had seen the structural diagram of the transport vehicle before. He knew that this cabin was originally in the middle of the vehicle. There was room for protection and buffer space in all four directions. Of course, there were also corresponding entrances and exits. He had to bring his tools up. Move forward another half an arm. You have 0 for seconds. A hoarse female voice came from the shadowy area formed on the other side of the freeze-alive device without warning. Luo didn't find it strange at all. No matter how the vehicle disintegrated or how many guards jumped or were injured, Lieutenant Shangmin, the only member of the medical sequence, would certainly be on the side of the freeze-alive device. Lieutenant Shangmin was the one who unloaded Luo Nan's momentum when he crashed inside. It was just that Luo Nan and Shangmin didn't have the leisure to do so. They didn't have the time to greet or chat. But now, when it came to maintaining the state of the freezing device, they had to communicate. Luo Nan also felt the need to explain a bit. I need 1 second. I need to take out the parts and complete the necessary assembly in the spare parts box. Then we need to fix and maintain the frozen alive device state and adjust the adaptability with the adapter port. Also, I need to take care of your injuries. Cough, cough, cough. Luo Nan spoke too fast, and he had to switch time units in the middle. His breathing was uneven, so he couldn't help but cough in the end. My injuries? In the shadows, Lieutenant Shangmin seemed to sneer, but still agreed. 1 second, get ready. Luo Nan didn't speak anymore. He calmed his breathing and shifted a short distance forward. His hand had just extended over when the two sides of the cabin split open, exposing the upper region of the spare parts trunk. The locking mechanism of the spare parts box opened amidst fine noises in the next instant. Luo Nan had a plan in mind. He scooped up the required modules and components and tossed them into the cabin. At the same time, dozens of flying ants beside him took off with a buzz. They marked out auxiliary lines in the air that only Luo Nan could understand, describing the configuration framework. They served as a medium to transmit a portion of his soul strength over. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this was crossing the line. He couldn't care too much about it. The extremely short time limit forced him to use every method possible. Only after the syncopator had begun working did he extend his hand into the spare parts trunk and join in the assembly work. Luo Nan's assembly speed was so fast that the external vertical collar dynamo core was unable to keep up with the tempo at certain notes. The dynamo core was faintly heating up at the back of his neck. Oh, or maybe it was because he wasn't used to violating the rules. Close the cabin. Thanks to Lieutenant Go Ye's standardization and foresight in loading the relevant modules, Luo Nan didn't need to use a full second. He was even notified ahead of time, and the cabin door immediately closed. Get ready to accelerate, Luo Nan shouted loudly. Then he immediately lay on the floor of the cabin. He extended his arm to grab the usable tools and spare parts that he had casually tossed out. He had just completed this series of actions when the outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation was like a sports car that had stepped on the accelerator all the way down. It shot out with a speed several times faster than before amidst the explosive rumble. It practically crossed the majority of the remaining natural rock formation canyon in an instant. It was infinitely close to the location of the Base 077 infrastructure module. At this point, its speed suddenly dropped, and it returned to its original level. It even dropped a bit. But no matter what, it was getting closer and closer to the blocking position. From beginning to end, the spare parts box and more than half of the modules and accessories inside did not enter the cabin. They had already completed their mission. It was nothing more than a single-use propeller. His train of thought is so crude and straightforward that it's scary. Lieutenant Shangmin's hoarse voice could still be considered steady, but speaking these dispensable evaluations proved that there were fluctuations in her state of mind. The instantaneous acceleration just now pushed Luo Nan directly to the rear of the cabin. He slammed into the cabin wall with banging sounds. He chuckled twice. No matter what was said, this simple single-use propeller allowed Mobile Squad 9 and the escort personnel to move the depth of the battlefield by a large margin into the Base 077 infrastructure module. They were already under the protection of the blocking position. They wouldn't need to engage in a life-and-death struggle with the assault beetles. This could pull back many people in an instant. Of course, Luonin also knew that the core of his mission this time was to ensure that the important person within the freeze-to-life installation was still Sir Shuyuan. He had to transport him back to the blocking position in a stable state and then transfer him to the interior of the base. From the looks of things, it was still relatively stable. The explosive power of the single-use propeller was still within the range that the outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation could bear. Though Luonan's plan was crude and straightforward, it had a relatively reliable basis. Luonan was not prepared to explain in detail to Lieutenant Shangmin. After all, the vanguard of the assault beetles was still 100 meters away. The enemy's aerial and long-range attacks could regroup at any time. Now was far from the time to chat. After laughing twice, Luonan struggled to get up. He organized the tools and spare parts he had just protected and began to reassemble. Luonan's position at the rear of the cabin was getting closer and closer to Lieutenant Shangmin. Without the obstruction of the freeze-to-life installation, they could look each other in the eye when they raised their heads. Of course, they could only see each other's exoskeleton armors. Lieutenant Shangmin sat in a semi-concave corner at the edge of the cabin wall. She bent one leg and extended the other. Her posture looked rather lazy, but she was actually controlling the injuries on her waist and abdomen. It was a rather heavy injury. Luonan only shot a glance in that direction before lowering his head to do the work in his hands. He needed to check the state of the freeze-to-life installation and perform a signal link. He needed Lieutenant Shangmin's authority, and the other side cooperated without any hindrance. Luonan's current work was different from his previous capricious disposable propeller project. He realized that the freeze-to-life installation was a necessary prerequisite for the docking of the interface between the freeze-to-life installation and the sniper position. Shangmin could certainly understand what he was doing. More importantly, if the transport vehicle had come over in one piece, then this wouldn't have happened. The outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation had traveled nearly half the distance through the crack at the front of the GHI 077. Luonan's adjustment work was more or less completed. Most of the most important work was already completed. Luonan could finally shift his attention to Lieutenant Shangmin's side. He observed her injuries and evaluated whether or not she was competent in the transfer work that was about to be carried out soon. Shangmin's gaze had already rested on Luonan's body for a long time. She spoke with a hoarse voice. Go Yi and Xianzhu didn't have much use. How did you discover my injuries? I figured it out from the configuration. Luonan didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. He spoke the truth. Right now, whether it was the freeze-to-life installation before his eyes, or Shangmin who was bound to the installation, or Mobile Squad 9, Goyi, Xianzhu, and Liang Lu, who were linked to his Array 1 after another. Of course, this included the ceaselessly approaching sniper position, the various officers and soldiers on the position. He could even extend this to the front lines of the battlefield, and even the entire relay station system structure. Everything was in the form of a configuration. It existed in his cognition, only in detail and in rough form. Luonan could faintly sense that the several thousand nodes on the battlefield formed a standard battle array. Even though nodes were constantly dimming and disappearing, the grand system formed from them still forcefully established a common order that belonged to the Heavenly Yuan Empire's army within the violent and chaotic battle situation at the front lines. The overall situation was like this, and the details were also like this. He was temporarily in Mobile Squad 9, and he was currently in the outer cabin of the freeze-to-life installation. Whether it was a person or an object, they were all a part of this common order. Even though the circumstances they faced were more or less different, they were able to draw support from this common order to forcefully dispel a portion of the pressure. They could erase certain chaotic variables and obtain a powerful reinforcement that far exceeded their individual strength. Correspondingly, they also had to obey the basic principles of this grand system. They had to construct a tight, collective domain to form a stable battle fortress. Understanding this rule allowed one to rapidly judge and grasp many changes within the system. Of course, Luo Nan was far from being able to see through the ultimate rule. However, the real-time state of the freeze-to-life installation, the severity of Shang Min's injuries, and the changes in the battlefield situation within a short period of time were all within the scope of his knowledge. He laughed and walked to the side of the freeze-to-life installation. He extended his hand and pressed lightly on the translucent cabin cover. He turned his head to look at Shang Min. "Lieutenant, you're deeply bound to this installation. You're using the dynamo core to realize control, and you're drawing support from the standard array to ensure the stability of the environment. But the leeway you've given yourself is too small. Right now, you need to share some of the pressure." Chapter 9:33. What Luo Nan said was not a suggestion, but a solution given from the standpoint of a maintenance soldier. A considerable portion of the assembly he did before was in service of this solution. His superiors, the technical director Go Yi and Xianzhu, did not raise any objections. At the very least, they maintained their silence. However, as the only person in the medical sequence present, Lieutenant Shang Min needed to communicate with him. The pressure is shifting. Where is it shifting? It's mainly this part of the mechanical structure, as well as the lost functionality of the rear half of the cabin. Luo Nan extended his hand and stroked the dimly lit air as he spoke, causing a visual projection to appear. A portion of the assembled mechanical modules lit up, and then a few areas of the bulkhead lit up. The syncopata outside of Luo Nan's body did not stop. It marked out the relevant configuration sketch in the air, and there were corresponding trajectories of light to connect them. Lieutenant Shang Min's fully covered helmet twisted slightly following Luo Nan's marking. Clearly, she was following Luo Nan's train of thought. She was seriously observing and thinking. Luo Nan did not give her too much time. His finger quickly swiveled and tapped his chest. "There's still me. I'm the regulating valve. Right now, this design can only be manually operated. Of course, all of this is just an intermediate link. In the end, all of the shifting pressure will be borne by the entire array. I will do my best to direct it towards a non-combat sequence. It would be best if it was directed towards the position to avoid affecting the assault squad behind. This requires a certain level of authority, but I believe my superiors will take care of it." Luo Nan's speed of speech was already raised to the extreme. Lieutenant Go Yi coughed in the channel belonging to the maintenance team, but Officer Xianzhu responded clearly, "The plan is feasible. I can't see the regulating valve too clearly, but as long as the front is fine, the rear half of the cabin will only be crushed by the shifting pressure, even if something happens." And the maintenance soldier himself. Stuffing the fleshly body inside is the most foolish action, but the core is brilliant. Lieutenant Go Yi finally opened his mouth to evaluate. He stabbed at Luo Nan, but he was not stingy with his words of praise. After all, Luo Nan's plan was the most feasible among all the plans that could be conceived on the spot. More importantly, it required the least amount of tools and spare parts. The transport vehicle that had fallen apart was no longer capable of supporting the more complex mechanical modules. Moreover, if they had to go to the front of the blocking formation to redo it, not only would it waste time, but it would also waste a lot of lives and precious fighter aircrafts. In the end, Go Yi only added one point. This is a semi-open working environment, so the chances of contamination are very high. However, it meets the requirements of the Level 2 pollution response. We have to pay attention to the follow-up treatment. I think it's feasible. This kind of evaluation was obviously shared across multiple channels. The conversation group that Lieutenant Shang Min was in must have received it, and perhaps there were even higher-level decision-makers. In short, Go Yi and Xianzhu gave Luo Nan a solid endorsement. Luo Nan's confident, unyielding, and decisive design became the most convincing element. In the end, Lieutenant Shangmin only said, "You'd better ensure your stamina. I have 2 tubes of enhancers here." Luonin grinned. Of course, no one could see him. "I also have a tube." Enhancers were, in fact, military stimulants. In critical situations, they were used to ensure the soldier's condition or to forcefully prolong their lives. Luo Nan's current physical strength was indeed another variable, but this wasn't a laboratory. There were no perfect conditions to speak of. In fact, Luo Nan had already begun operating when Lieutenant Shangmin spoke. The number of centimeters increased a bit more. They danced up and down within the sealed cabin. They were actually doing the final modifications to the design of the freezing device and the space between the 2 people. At the same time, they also became carriers. They were set up at various important nodes. Luo Nin only used the time of a single breath to complete all the preparatory work. Corresponding to this, he had modified and optimized the design many times in his brain and in the maintenance group channel. Go Yi and Xianzhu, these 2 veteran maintenance soldiers, had done a great deal of work behind the scenes, supplementing Luo Nan's deficiencies in the mechanical structure. The embryonic form of the pressure discharge tunnel had already been constructed. Luo Nan was still following his own plan. He made detailed modifications step by step, requesting to transfer out the standard sub-3 type array group array. Approved. The interface for the assault position maintenance group has been opened. Luo Nan sucked in a breath of cold air. It wasn't that he was startled. It was just that the instantaneous load on his body and soul was a bit excessive. He had rapidly adjusted the state of his energy and even the details of his body and soul frame in an extremely short amount of time. In any case, he was able to smoothly complete the relevant steps. In this way, Luo Nan, the flood discharge valve, would have minimal impact on Mobile Squad 9, who were on the front lines of the assault, regardless of success or failure. Mobile Squad 9's group channel was cut off. Xianzhu's words popped up in the maintenance group channel. "Well done. Yanxian transferred this to you. It's really not bad to be able to reach this step." Lieutenant Shangmin interjected. "Do you need strengthening elements?" "Not for now." Luonin grinned. He had yet to step into the threshold of the furnace deployment technique by the standards of the heavenly Yuan Empire. His fleshly body cultivation wasn't worth mentioning, but his foundation was still quite solid. There was no need to talk about how he had taken the medicine to verify formatting theory in his early years. Gym Master Xiao had taught him the 9 orifices, 6 roots technique. His internal organs, tendons, bones, and skin were all practiced. His 4 limbs and hundreds of bones were smooth inside and out. He was also a standard fleshly awakened. With the support of his keen perception of configuration, such adjustments were still within the scope of his abilities. He even had the spare energy to do other things. For example, when some equipment was missing, he could bestow his own exoskeleton armor with additional functions through fine adjustments to the body and soul frame. He could temporarily act as a conductor, connecting the mechanical modules and the bulkhead to form an even smoother flood discharge channel. And since Luo Nin had already linked up with the array that Go Yi and the others were in, the area of the flood discharge area had expanded to cover the entire blocking position. According to what he said to Lieutenant Shangmin, the leeway had increased. It had truly increased. Lieutenant Shangmin was the one who could sense the changes the most. Her half-curl body unconsciously stretched out a bit. The gentle feeling of relaxation caused her to believe that she had received a direct blessing from the jade crystal array within the base for an instant. But clearly, the jade crystal array, which was still in a state of repair, didn't have the leisure to do so. Strictly speaking, the negative energy that accumulated in her body and endlessly devoured her energy and life force didn't decrease or shift. But as the leeway increased, the standard array had more room to operate with its individual blessings and enhancements. Shangmin had already begun to try standing up. She asked in passing, "You can also import adjustments aside from flood discharge." Luo Nan responded, "Array Lieji has this item. You're stealing the work of our medical sequence." Shangmin didn't continue on this topic. She panted slightly and relied on her own strength to slowly get up while leaning against the wall of the cabin. She staggered a step and arrived by the side of the freezing live device. She supported the translucent outer shell with her hand and confirmed the state of Sure Yuan within. The outer cabin of the freezing live device had already arrived at the middle and rear section of the fissure tunnel of GH-077. It was only 100 meters away from the blocking position, which had already become a strong city. Luo Nan was familiar with Earth time, so it would only take around 10 seconds for him to arrive. Just from the distance, success was already at hand. But Sir Yuan was in a frozen state. He couldn't hold on, or perhaps the device's transfer was unsuccessful. Everything in front of him was for naught. Luo Nan subconsciously held his breath. It was unknown how many people were the same as him at this moment. Then, he heard Lieutenant Shangmin sigh in relief with his own ears. She turned her head to look at him. Her metal visor was ice-cold, but her voice was warm. The tool is an extension of the human body. The human body is also an advanced form of the tool. Only the soul is in control. You're quite classical. Luo Nin still wasn't too clear on the classical definition of the heavenly Yuan Empire. He could only laugh foolishly. Yeah, Shangmin's gossip proved the effectiveness of Luo Nan's plan and execution. Perhaps the entire blocking position let out a long sigh of relief in this instant. The work entered a stable state. The vertical collar chip on the back of Luo Nan's neck endlessly transferred data to the blocking position's transfer and maintenance module. Lieutenant Shangmin had something similar, but it was only limited to the freezing live device itself. It was also the core of all other designs and equipment services. Luo Nin didn't need to worry about it. The AI system established a real-time correspondence between these data for the executors to refer to. Luo Nan's authority was expanding, and he was exposed to more and more information. This included a portion of the base taking the initiative to open up to him. But at the same time, there were a few more subtle things. They gradually appeared as he operated special operations that hovered on the line of compliance and violation. The range and depth of Luo Nan's senses were both expanding. He still couldn't wander into the void as he pleased. But in this environment, where the dynamo core was the central axis that linked people and objects together, possessing a solid material foundation and a unique array system, his mental senses seemed to have a place of use, especially the rapid absorption, digestion, and analysis of complex information. This was Luo Nan's forte as a psychic. Gradually, Luo Nan's consciousness began to drift. The restrictions of the special environment were a bit loose. It was as if he had pushed aside the fog of war in the front lines. He was able to observe and appreciate the formatted space constructed by the standard battle array. No, it was the bloodshed field, the myriad of formations and evolutions. Although the vast majority of the changes followed a pattern that Luo Nan could understand, the bloodshed field was able to realize an even higher level of operation by relying on these basic patterns. Needless to say, even a part of it was able to ascend to a higher level in a short amount of time. It was able to contend against tyrannical existences like the infernal tyrant and the magnetic mica jellyfish. Unfortunately, he couldn't understand anything at this level. It was just a blur. Luo Nan's state of mind was still quite stable. There were many things he couldn't understand in this mystical game scene constructed by the simulator of the inner universe. But as long as the disparity in the flow of time existed for a long period of time, he would have a lot of time to study it. A marvelous scene suddenly appeared in the space of a thought. Luo Nin saw two of himself. One was sleeping in a spacious bedroom. The entire scene was frozen like an engraving. The other was standing in a narrow cabin. His movements weren't big, but every instant presented a dizzying abundance of detail. The clear directionality of the scene made Luo Nin quickly realize that this was him in reality and in the game. Sure enough, the flow of time on both sides was different. But then again, he could feel from the instantaneous cross-section that the difference wasn't particularly shocking. It was somewhat contrary to the conclusion deduced by logic. Or perhaps they were converging. Luo Nan's thoughts were a mess. The scene returned to nothingness. But he finally understood what he needed to understand. From this moment onwards, the time he spent in the game scene was clearly restricted by the true environment of Earth space-time. He was about to reach his limit.